All right, we're live. Welcome everybody to the live chat. This is something I've been waiting for a while. This is another in our series of, the three-person panel boxing history discussion. Two very special guests with me today to count down our top 10 greatest welterweights of all time lists. We have the boxing librarian. Welcome, BL.
Yeah, thank you, Random. Hello to Scrapbook Boxing and hello to all the listeners. I'm looking forward to this latest top 10 countdown. Another real tough one.
Yes, welcome, Scrap. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. How you doing today, Random? How's it going, BL?
I'm good, Scrapbook. Thank you. Good to see you, as always.
We have as you can see, the viewers at least, we got some new graphics going on. This is a war. This is a battle of resumes. And for the uninitiated, we don't set any kind of criteria for this. So we can rank fighters on it based on any kind of floating criteria, just on our whim. We're just here to celebrate a lot of fighters, and hopefully the graphics keep up with the discussion, which I'm really looking forward to. So, BL and Scrap, which one you guys want us to start with you? Because I'm not going first. Which one of you guys would like to open up the show for us?
Well, I can start. I know BL started last time. Do you want to go first, BL, or you want me to take the reign on this?
Oh, if you want to go first, Scrapbook, it's all good, buddy. It's all good.
Well, okay. Well, we were asked to choose 10 the greatest welterweight champions, which is a difficult task. You had so many great fighters in the welterweight division throughout the course of history. And there was a lot of things that were considered. Now, on my end, I could not mention those who were not in the 15-round era because it takes a lot to really judge you within those last 3 rounds. So I couldn't add anyone that didn't participate in the 15 era. Also, I looked at the era in which the man came, as I normally do. And I looked at the opponents that they fought and the time that they came from. So I made decisions from there. So my number 10 is Ted Kid Lewis. And the reason why I chose Ted Kid Lewis number 10, because here's a man who came at a time when boxing was on its high point, if you will. I mean, he's born October 28th, 1893 in London, England. He died October 20th, 1970 in London, England as well. He stood 5'8.5" and weighed from 116 to 166 pounds, but he fought as high as heavyweight. And that needs to be taken in consideration. In 1911, he fought 58 bouts, 68 bouts, 6 times in January, 6 times in February, 3 times in March, 5 times in April, 5 times in May, 4 times in June, 2 times in July, 3 times in August, 5 times in September, 7 times in October, 5 times in November, 6 times in December, 80 rounds of boxing. So these are things that I considered when I chose fighters to be on this list, because a lot of things happen within those rounds that you are fighting. Traveling from state to state or country to country, and there's different criteria within each state, no decision contest and what have you. So Ted Kid Lewis for me is a very good pick for number 10, because there's other fighters that have done more things, accomplished or enhanced, I should say, their legacy a little bit more than Ted Kid Lewis, but Ted Kid Lewis was something else. I mean, he discovered the mouth guard. There was a lot of things about Ted Kid Lewis that really intrigued me. So I chose him number 10.
Ah, fantastic. Very good choice. BL, would you like to? I won't ask. So I'm not going to ask you guys to elaborate on each other's picks, or although you're welcome to, I will ask you to elaborate on my eventual picks here. But BL, it is time for the magnificent number 10 pick.
Right, well, yeah, great choice by Scrapper. Ted Kid Lewis, a real all-time great. My number 10 is actually another legitimate all-time great who fought from welterweight to heavyweight. But he was a roughly 3.5 year lineal undisputed welterweight champion, who did beat a lot of good fighters at welterweight and made a smaller number of defenses than what he did at middleweight. My number 10 is actually the toy bulldog, Mickey Walker. I had 10 fighters fighting for 10th place. But in the end, many of them, kind of as Scrap alluded to, were fighting 12-round fights. Also, many of them were not unified, many of them not undisputed, whereas Mickey Walker ticks all those boxes. He was the welterweight king for that shorter reign than what he had at middleweight. But for a number of years, he was the king. He did also fight and beat really difficult fighters, okay, like Soldier Barfield more than once, okay. He also won and lost to the excellent Dave Shade, who was one at best welterweight and middleweights at 1920s. He also won and drew to fighters, okay, like Jack Britton, okay, the boxing marvel. Now, it was later in Britain's career, but Britain was the welterweight champion. Mickey Walker had the crossover fight with Jack Britton to become the new undisputed king. He also beat the excellent Pete Latzo, who was a very good fighter, who's also gone to campaign at light heavyweight, interestingly enough, as well as fighting fighters like Jimmy Jones. So for me, you know, when you look at Mickey Walker, and to me, anybody who can gain wins over people like Lou Tendler and fighters I've mentioned, added to the lineal undisputed championship, and also added to the fact he was one of the most powerful welterweight champions to me. Very physically strong. He was physically strong, middleweight and even light heavyweight. Not as strong at heavyweight. He was just more game. He had a lot of power and a lot of strength and stamina. But to me, one of the most powerful welterweight champions of all time. All of those things added together, and coupled with his power, his endurance, you know, his chin. All around, Mickey Walker to me got my number 10.
Excellent choice there, my friend. Okay, it's coming down to the wire. So I've been struggling between my number 9 and number 10, as I have been with many different people on this list. But for my number 10, I'm going to go with the great Sugar Ray Leonard, who had a shorter career than probably anybody who we'd be considering on this list. Is that fair to say? In fight count, as far as professional
when you look
fights.
at it from I was going to say, when you look at it from a perspective of him taking time off and then move to junior middleweight, yes, you're correct.
But what a burst. And if you're talking about signature wins and a compressed career, I had to give this great fighter a shout. And I know you guys are more familiar with some other fighters with a lot of deeper resumes, so I wasn't sure if he'd make either of your lists. So I definitely gave him a shout. I just sprinkling a little Sugar Ray Leonard right there. Brilliant fighter, a mean fighter, you know, when he needed to be. Like he was vicious, and he just had the image of a pretty boy, but he was vicious and clever. Great stamina, great intuition and adaptability, like just everything. Checks every box. Didn't have as many fights, so he's my number 10.
Yeah, I won't go too deep into Sugar Ray Leonard random because I will be discussing him very shortly. But fantastic. I will throw back it behind you when I speak on him.
Fantastic. Scrapbook, I believe we've arrived at your number 9, sir.
Yes, I just want to quickly say to BL, Mickey Walker, what a fighter he was. And that was a great choice. I have him a little higher, but that was a great choice, man, because shuffling these guys around, it's a headache, believe me. But my number 9 is Emil Griffith. Yeah, for sure. I have Emil Alfonso Griffith. That's who I have. He was born February 3rd, 1938 in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. He stood 5'7.5" inches. He was a welterweight and had a 72-inch reach. He fought as welterweight and as a middleweight. He also picked up the junior middleweight championship belt. He was in the ring with Don Fulmer and Isaac Lugard, Ralph Dupas, and Florentino Fernandez. Florentino Fernandez was a very good fighter. He was stopped by Ruben Hurricane Carter in one round, but he was some fighter. He was in the ring with Jorge Fernandez and Florentino Fernandez, Gypsy Joe Harris, Gaspar Ortega, Don Jordan, Yama Bahama, Stanley Kitten Haywood, Brian Cuevas, Joey Archer twice, Ralph Dupas, Jose Stable, Randy Sandy, Denny Moyer, Ruben Hurricane Carter, Dick Tiger, Carlos Monzon, just to name a few. But he had his wars as a welterweight with Benny Kid Paret. And it was a faithful night in Madison Square Garden, April 3rd, 1962. And 12th round was not kind to Benny Kid Paret. It changed the game a lot, because once the State Athletic Commission got involved, a lot of things changed. Benny Kid Paret died not so much of the amount of punishment he took, which contributed a tremendous amount to his unfortunate death, but it was because of the ring posts that didn't have padding. He banged his head in the back of the pole, and that's when they decided to put ring poles, padding on the poles. And so many changes took place in 1962 with the government bodies, the sanctioning bodies, the rules. So Emil Griffiths had a great deal to do with a lot of those changes, because he had to testify and so on and so forth. So I have him ranked number 9 in his very tight and difficult decision in the welterweight division.
Fantastic. BL, I believe we are now at your number 9. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. My number 9 is actually a fighter you've just mentioned, Random. I actually went for Sugar Ray Leonard, number 9. Now, I'm aware that Sugar Ray Leonard does not have as much work at welterweight as some of the fighters, and I had an argument between he and Tommy Hearns, but Leonard gets the nod. Now, one thing that Leonard did do, okay, following his Olympic success, okay, he charged up the welterweight ratings in very, very good time and ended up as challenger. Now, the thing about Ray Leonard, on my ratings, I'm not really going just on pure welterweight work. I'm going on them as a fighter as well. And I'll just give a brief breakdown, but just going on his work at welterweight. For one, okay, he beat the great Wilfred Benitez. Okay, when Benitez a second weight, he was a champion. Sugar Ray Leonard beat Wilfred Benitez, all-time great, you know, defensive wizard, to win his first world title. You know, this wasn't like, you know, Devin Haney beating a Linares, or, you know, this wasn't like, you know, Adrian Broner beating this guy or that guy. You know, he went in with one of the great defensive fighters of all time and a 3-weight champion, and beat him. Had a difficult fight, but eventually broke him down. Prior to that, he'd also fought some tough fights against Floyd Sr., etc., etc. But beating Benitez was an incredible win in your first ever title fight. And this kind of sums Sugar Ray Leonard up, because from there, you know, he iced Dave Boy Green with that fantastic, you know, left-right, followed up with a chilling left hook that just iced Dave Boy Green. I mean, you hear the thud half a mile away. You know, he takes out Dave Boy Green. He goes into Roberto Duran fight at welterweight as well. He loses in the first fight that drew me to the sport of boxing. It was Sugar Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran fight one that I saw in the early 80s that made me a lifelong boxing fan. It was an incredible battle, one of the great fights of all time, never mind just one of the great welterweight fights of all time. Leonard lost a very close decision, but then showed that greatness by coming back and actually making Duran no mas. Okay, and people have to remember at this time, Duran, yeah, he'd partied, he hadn't trained as well as he did for the first fight, but that was his problem. Leonard forced a quicker rematch than Duran wanted, and Leonard trained like a Trojan, and he absolutely made a mockery of him. And at this point, Duran still only had that one defeat he had to Esteban de Jesus down at lightweight that he'd also since twice avenged. Okay, so he beats Wilfred Benitez. Okay, he ices a few people. He loses to Duran in one of the great welterweight fights of all time, comes back and makes Duran quit in the no mas fight. He then goes into another of the great fights of all time against the hitman Tommy Hearns, who was an unbeaten wrecking machine who'd been destroying virtually everything in his path, had a massive winning record, unbeaten, loads of knockouts. Tommy Hearns was a devastating fighter at welterweight. It destroyed Cuevas, who was a long-reigning champion himself, in only 2 rounds to capture his first title, WBA welterweight title. Leonard had to survive hell in that fight. After having a good period, I think if I remember from rounds 4 to 6, after the first 3 rounds, they were a bit at sea, but I think he hurt Hearns. It were around the 4th round, and Leonard had a few good rounds, but then Hearns started moving and going behind his jab, and Leonard was falling behind the cards. His eye was swelling up, but he showed that incredible toughness and resilience. You know, after becoming undisputed champion, after already, you know, being a 2-time WBC welterweight champion, he captured that WBA strap to become undisputed, full undisputed linear welterweight champion. And the number of great opponents he's got on there: Benitez, Duran twice, Tommy Hearns, some of the greatest welterweight fights of all time. Coupled to that with Sugar Ray Leonard, he to me is one of the great punchers of the welterweight division. Sugar Ray Leonard doesn't get credit. Sugar Ray Leonard was a big puncher at welterweight. He also had incredible speed, foot movement, stamina, endurance, and an incredible will to win. Because to me, it was his sheer bloody-minded refusal to lose, coupled with his toughness, that even kept him in that Tommy Hearns fight. Even to come through that fight, being laced with them jabs and right hands. I mean, Leonard said later, years later, probably about a decade ago in an interview, that Hearns was so quick. Hearns was hitting him with lead right hands, and they were so fast Leonard couldn't see him coming. He couldn't even react to block them. He had to go through hell to win that fight, and in doing so, became undisputed champion. And to me, Sugar Ray Leonard, when you add, like I mentioned, his power, his footwork, his speed, his durability, his endurance, his stamina, he is a major threat to potentially beat any welterweight in any era in boxing history. So that's why he had to go in my top 10. But because he didn't have the amount of work that some others had, I could only put him at number 9. Sorry, I babbled then, guys. Sorry about that.
Not at all. That was fantastic. Shout out to the chat. Thanks for coming, everybody. Shout out to everyone showing up afterwards as well. Welcome. Okay, so after much struggle for my number 9, I'm going with the Belfast Spider, the great Jimmy McLarnin, who had I suppose if you relate to like from today through his era in the 30s to the old school, he had like a medium length career. It would seem long by today's standards, but it's absolutely jam packed against legends, Hall of Famers, 5 Hall of Fame trilogies, plus other Hall of Fame fights. It's the one of the craziest resumes you'd ever see of that length, and had to give him a shout, even though not everything he was just doing was at welterweight, and some of the stuff at welterweight might have been lighter greats moving up to him at but he moved up himself, so it was other guys' turn. But what a great fighter. Couldn't put him higher because he didn't have as large a body of work as other guys. But yeah, great Jimmy McLarnin. He was my number 9. So who does that bring us to now?
Yeah, I don't have Jimmy McLarnin in my top 10. I don't know if Scrapbook does, but if not, I'll just throw a quick chime in if that's okay.
Please.
Scrap, you don't have Jimmy McLarnin in your top 10?
I do actually. Yeah, I do.
All right, okay.
Feel free.
No, that's good, mate. I will let you discuss it on your countdown. That's all good.
Okay, sure. And you can join me if you like. If you had to add anything, no problem.
Yeah, we'll do, mate. Yeah, we'll do. So sorry, Random. Yeah.
Fantastic. No, this is fun. We are freeform. You guys can do whatever you want. You can switch. You can change your mind later on in the thing. Who cares? We're just celebrating all kinds of great fighters. We can make it up as we go along. I don't even know where we're at now. Have we arrived at someone's number 8 or?
You just done your number 9, so it's Scrapbook's number 8.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, I'm up now, and I'm going to piggyback off of BL with Sugar Ray Leonard. I have him ranked number 8. Ray Charles Leonard, and for basically the same reason, his resume, he didn't fight long enough to be ranked higher. He was en route to doing that. Because of the detached retina, it prevented him from doing so. But Ray Leonard fought fighters such as Andy Price and Bruce Finch, Floyd Mayweather Sr., Randy Field, Adolfo Viruet. A lot of people don't know who he was. He had a brother named Edwin Viruet, who fought Roberto Duran twice. Ray Leonard was in a ring with Pete Ranzani and Thomas the Hitman Hearns twice. Wilfred Benitez in 1979. And Benitez, they called the Radar, one of the best defensive fighters your money could buy. Davey Boy Green, probably one of the greatest combination ending with a left hook to get a man out of there since Sugar Ray Robinson. Kevin Howard and Roberto Duran, just to name a few. Obviously Marvin Hagler, and in fact, when he fought Hagler, April 6, 1987, was for the WBC Middleweight Championship crown. Hagler was stripped from the other belts. I was at that fight in Las Vegas, Nevada. I was at the fight when Ray Leonard fought Donnie Lalonde, November 7th, 1988, for the WBC Light Heavyweight and Super Middleweight Championship crown. I was at the fight when Ray Leonard fought Terry Norris, February 9th, 1991. It was 12 rounds, unanimous decision. It was for the Junior Middleweight Championship belt, the WBC version of it. Ray Leonard took a beating for 12 rounds. I was at the fight when he fought Hector Camacho at the Convention Center in Atlantic City. He was stopped in 5 rounds for the IBC Middleweight Championship crown. I was at the fight September 16th, 1981, when he faced Thomas the Hitman Hearns, Las Vegas, Nevada, 14 rounds. And that was a hell of a fight. It was for the WBC and the WBA. And that was one of the most compelling moments of me traveling to see fights as a young man. I was at the fight when he fought Roberto Duran in New Orleans. And after the Montreal fight, I had to definitely see that fight. And that was something else. He made his comeback. Everybody thought, they counted him out, actually, as far as being the man they thought he was. And he actually showed the world that he could box. He could really, really control himself, and that's what he did. And he frustrated Roberto Duran. No one has ever done that before. Fought Wilfred Benitez. He fought Thomas Hearns. He fought all the great names. So he deserves to be on this list. Unfortunately for Ray Leonard, he wasn't around long enough to sustain it and to fight some of the new fighters coming in. He tried that with Norris and he came up short. So I have him ranked number 8.
Oh, fantastic. So, BL, we're at your number 8, sir.
Oh, my number 8, okay, is the Barbados Demon, Joe Walcott. The reasons I picked Barbados Walcott as my number 8, point 1, is one of the great pound-for-pound knockout punchers of all time in my book. If you do the punching on more of a pound-for-pound based on size, to me, Barbados Walcott's one of the great knockout punchers of all time, and he was a brutal welterweight puncher who could actually knock out middleweights and light heavyweights as a welterweight and a lightweight. So he's one of the great punchers. He also had incredible hand speed, also very good at moving, doesn't really get the credit he deserves. In one of his earlier fights with Mysterious Billy Smith down at lightweight, he actually was given a draw, but he actually pretty much outfoxed Mysterious Billy Smith, who were a 2-time champion down there in the 1890s. Coming into more the late 1890s, 1900s, he struggled to gain results against Mysterious Billy Smith, partially due to having some tough fights and then some other things that, went on at the time due to his colour, sadly, as boxing was back then. But Barbados Joe Walcott, did fight people like Bobby Dobbs. He also fought an excellent fighter called Dan Creedon a whole number of times. Now, this is kind of on his way to traversing to welterweight, but as a welterweight, Barbados Walcott destroyed Joe Choinski in 7 rounds. Now, he destroyed Joe Choinski, who the following year would knock out Jack Johnson in the 3rd round. By this time as well, unlike the earlier fights, he was gaining regular wins against Mysterious Billy Smith. He also beat, around when he was at welterweight, he had a fight series and scored multiple wins over a tough contender called Tommy West. He also fought another tough contender gaining wins called Jack Bonner. He also stopped Charlie McKeever, who was a very underrated fighter from back then and was a very good fighter. He also stopped a middleweight version, on points 20 rounds, stopped a middleweight version of George Gardner, who would go on to become a light heavyweight champion at World. Barbados Walcott stopped him as a welterweight. And this kind of led into the Rube Burns fight in 1901. Joe Walcott destroyed Rube Burns. I mean, this 5-round mutilation, they call it a boxing match. This was more like Walcott playing him like a ping pong ball. I mean, his body punching, his aggression, he was just overwhelming Rube Burns, became the undisputed lineal welterweight champion of the world. Something that Barbados Walcott always doesn't get the credit for. I find a lot of people talk about that period, the early 1900s, at the start of the decade, and they always mention Joe Gans, but they also don't mention the achievement that Barbados Walcott also made in becoming the lineal undisputed champion, the weight up from Joe Gans at welterweight. Now, at welterweight, he also fought young Peter Jackson, the Baltimore Demon. I mean, enough said. Going on even pretty much as a welterweight, kind of partially going to middleweight, he even fought former coloured heavyweight champion Frank Childs, who was an outstanding fighter. Yes, he did lose that fight, but he's still around that weight for a former coloured heavyweight champion and a very, very good fighter indeed. Barbados Walcott fought through his career, made a number of welterweight title defenses. He fought young Peter Jackson, another tough fight that would have drawn points over 20 rounds. He destroyed Mysterious Billy Smith at one point by TKO in 4 rounds. And generally, in that time, he was one of the most feared fighters in boxing. Even heavyweights, some heavyweights didn't want to fight him. He even challenged Tom Sharkey and Gus Rulin, who were heavyweight contenders and very good heavyweight contenders. They wanted no part of Barbados Walcott. He even challenged Jack Johnson to a fight. I mean, that's insane, but he challenged Jack Johnson to a fight. This was a guy who would fight anybody, but at welterweight, he was a quick, heavy punching, destructive machine. He had incredible stamina, incredible punch output. The draw with Sam Langford, where over the first 4 rounds, he actually, dropped Walcott, busted up Walcott's mouth a bit, and were actually pinning Walcott with that jab and then hitting him with left hooks as Walcott came in, timing him with left hooks. An earlier form of what is a check hook. People think the check hook came from 50s. No, Langford were doing it to Barbados Walcott in early 1900s. As Walcott charged in, Langford stepped aside and were hitting him with left hooks. So he fought back against Langford and fought to a 15-round draw. After 5-6 rounds, he started exploding with volumes of punches. Langford suddenly, by round 11 and 12, were finding it hard going. Many people said Langford should have got the nod, and I agree, but the fight is declared a draw. But that's Barbados Walcott all round. To me, he's one of the most devastating welterweight punchers of all time. One of the most greatest pound-pound punchers, period. And also, when you consider the opponents he fought, Dan Creedon's, Mysterious Billy Smith's, young Peter Jackson's, destroying Rube Ferns, as a welterweight, destroying Hall of Famer Joe Choyinski. When you look at his resume, his career video is coming on my channel. I've been getting it ready today, actually. And his career is incredible, and I can't wait to share that career because people will realize what a great fighter he was. Even though a lot of people do give him his credit, some people are still a bit, dry on exactly what he did. Hopefully my video will shine a light. But as a welterweight, a tremendously dangerous welterweight fighter. Again, could trouble any welterweight in history.
Nice, very nice. Well picked, sir.
Sorry, guys, I am rambling a bit tonight, but I'm always excited for these talks, so I ramble a bit. I apologize.
No, we love this.
Yeah,
no, we love
exactly.
This.
So what we're doing? Am I on number 8 now? I'm already lost.
Yeah, you're on 8. You're on 8.
All right, for my number 8. Forgive me if I'm underrating this great fighter. We'll pull up my graphic here. I actually went with Ted Kid Lewis, the great Ted Kid Lewis. This guy was a machine. He had a huge career. And BL, if I'm not mistaken, on your updated top 1,000 rankings, he's number 9 all time. And the only reason he's not higher on this my welterweight list is because his fantastic career was spread across so many weights. He has a very great distribution of great opponents across the weights, but strictly at welter, I couldn't put him any lower. But there was some others, just more concentrated careers at welterweight. So great Ted Kid Lewis. So that brings us to Scrapbook. Your leading number 7, is it?
Yes, my number 7 is the Belfast Spider, babyface assassin, Jimmy McLaurin. Born December 19th, 1907, died October 28th, 2004. He was 96 years of age at the time of his passing, and I had the pleasure of meeting Jimmy McLaurin multiple occasions. He was a flyweight, bantamweight, lightweight, as well as a welterweight. Stood 5'6" and had a 67-inch reach. He had a total bout career of 69 fights, 55 wins, 21 knockouts, 11 losses, 3 draws. He had a manager by the name of Pop Foster. In his 18th win, he was in the ring with Fidel LaBarba, October 28th, 1924 in Vernon, California. In his 19th fight, he had a draw with Fidel LaBarba, November 11th, 1924 in Vernon, California. His 20th match, he had a draw with Memphis Pal Moore, December 9th, 1924. 21st win for Della Barber, January 13th, 1925. I just want you to get an idea of the schedule this man had for a short career. His 22nd win was with Teddy Silver, March 24th, 10 rounds, Vernon, California. Now, these names, Teddy Silver, you can equivalent these fighters and their time to fighters such as some of the main opponents of guys of today, like Golden Johnson, when some of the lightweights during his era was at their peak, such as Vernon Forrest when he was a welterweight. You had Golden Johnson and a lot of these guys, Rockin' Rodney Moore, all of these kind of fighters. Well, that's the kind of fighter Memphis Power Moore was. He can defeat you at any given time. He was a very, very good fighter during his era. His 25th fight, Pancho Villa. And that was Pancho Villa's last fight because he got hit in the throat. He visited the dentist that day before, and blood had clotted in his throat, and he died. And that was under the hands of Jimmy McLaurin. That was July 4th, 1925 in Oakland, California. He was in the ring with Jackie Fields on his 27th fight, knocked him out. November 1925, Los Angeles, California. And his 20th match, he won a file against Charles Bud Taylor, December 8th, 1925 in Vernon, California. Defeated fighters such as Louis Kid Kaplan, knocked him out in 8 rounds. Sid Terrace, knocked him out in 1 round. Sergeant Sammy Baker, knocked out in 1 round. Joe Click fought him twice. Ray Miller had a 10-round unanimous decision against him. Sammy Mandel, Ruby Golding, knocked him out in 2 rounds. Young Jack Thompson, Al Singer, knocked him out in 3 rounds. Billy Patrol fought him twice. Billy Patrol was the Fargo Express. He was in the ring with Benny Lennon, knocked him out in 6 rounds. Sammy Fuller, 8 rounds knockout. Young Corbett III knocked him out in 1 round and won the welterweight championship strap. Young Corbett III was the southpaw, and he gave a lot of fighters problems. And then he had that trilogy with Barney Ross. And he would defeat Lou Ambers in his last fight. Lou Ambers wound up becoming a lightweight champion, and he would lose his title to Henry Armstrong. And before that, he fought 2 fights with Tony Canzaneri. So when you look at Jim McLaurin's career, the amount of fighters that he fought that were top-notch caliber fighters is why I have to have him on his list. And I would like to have him a little higher, but there's fighters ahead of him that have an even more spectacular career. So Jim McLaurin, I have this man ranked number 7.
Yeah, Scrapbook, fantastic breakdown. I just want to kind of reinforce what Scrapbook said there to people, because as people know my channel, I'm a big fan of Jimmy McLaurin. I recently did a video highlighting how his last 29 opponents, every one of them were rated. Piles of them were champions or Hall of Famers. But what I'm going to do to back Scrapbook here on his great choice for Jimmy McLaurin is I'm just going to read a list out, similar to what Scrapbook did. But listeners, really think about this list. You have Ray Miller, okay, a loss. Joe Glick, win. Joe Glick, knockout. Ray Miller, win. Sergeant Sammy Baker, knockout. Okay, Sammy Mandel, win. Ruby Goldstein, knockout. Sammy Mandel, win. Young Jack Thompson, win. Al Singer, knockout. Billy Patrol, loss. Billy Patrol, win. Billy Patrol, win. Lou Brewillard, loss. Benny Leonard, knockout. Sammy Fuller, a very underrated fighter, knockout. Young Corbett III, a Hall of Famer, 1st round knockout. Lost to Barney Ross. Won Barney Ross, lost to Barney Ross, lost to Canzaneri, won Canzaneri, won Lou Ambers. Do you know that if I just think about that, nearly 18 of McLaurin's last 29 fighters were not only top 10 rated, they were top 3 rated. A whole pile of them were Hall of Famers. In fact, when you go down his list from Young Corbett III, okay, to Ross, Canzaneri, Ambers, they're all Hall of Famers, people. If you miss Sammy Fuller out, who should be in the Hall of Fame anyway, before that, there's another 5 fights against Hall of Famers, okay? So out of 13, his last 13 fights, 12 of them were against Hall of Fame fighters. He won the World Welterweight title twice, as Scrapbooks pointed out. Twice beating Hall of Famers in Young Corbett III and Barney Ross. To me, Jim McLaurin is an all-time great. That was a great breakdown, Scrapbook. And, you know, I've been trying to sell to people Jimmy McLaurin's great career for a long time, and he really is an all-time great.
Thank you, Bill. Good job, brother. Thank you.
Nice. So, BL, was that your add-on, or what was that your actual number 7? I've
Oh
already
no,
lost
that's
track.
just my add-on, mate. My number 7. Okay, I'm going Mantequilla, Jose Napoles, who didn't have as great a resume as some welterweights, but was a dominant champion for many years, and is one of the longest reigning welterweight champions in years and months in boxing history, right up there with Trinidad, approaching a 7-year title reign. Now, Jose Napoles was a 2-time undisputed champion. He first won his title, okay, against the super tough Curtis Coates, actually forcing a stoppage in later rounds. And then, as if that win is not impressive enough to those who know Curtis Coates, very tough fighter, he then stopped Curtis Coates a second time. And then in his third title fight, he outpointed the great Emil Griffith himself. Yeah, Griffith were later in his career, but Mantequilla did what he needed to do and beat Emil Griffith. They then defended against Ernie Lopez, okay, gaining another stoppage win. That were really late on. Then he lost the undisputed title to another super tough fighter, Billy Backus. Okay, that was on a cut, though. When he fought Billy Backus in the rematch, he actually stopped him in the middle rounds to become a 2-time undisputed welterweight champion of the world. And his reign continued after that. He beat Ernie Lopez again. He beat Roger Menetre. He beat the tough Clyde Gray. Okay, Clyde Gray was actually a very tough contender. He beat him. He went up and challenged the great Carlos Monzon, but the clinical assassin Monzon broke him down and dismantled him. But then he also gained other wins over fighters like Armando Muniz, Hedgemon Lewis, another fantastic fighter. When you look at eventually losing his title to John H. Stracey, but when you look at Jose Napoles, he has one of the longest welterweight reigns of all time in years and months. He also had a massive title fight record. Jose Napoles was approaching 20 world title fights. He won most of those, most of them undisputed title fights. He did foray to middle and lose, but he also beat a lot of good fighters. And I think, beating Curtis Coates twice, beating Billy Backus, beating Emil Griffith, beating many of the fighters he fought, like Hedgemon Lewis, etc., etc. He goes a bit underrated. His resume is not as strong as some of the great welterweights, but he was a dominant welterweight champion for many, many years and beat a lot of good fighters, and has one of the longest runs of defenses in welterweight title history. So Jose Napoles was my number 7.
Oh, fantastic. So we've arrived at my number 7.
Correct.
Well, the stars align. My number 7 is also Napoles for the same reasons, but in much more generic, still trying to learn about all these great fighters way. But I can't put it any better than you just put it, but I wholeheartedly agree. And for the same reasons, there are other resumes that maybe hit harder, but what a fantastic body of work. And so he couldn't go any lower than this. I absolutely couldn't. Even over Kid Lewis, which was tough. I struggle with a lot of these. I'm sure, I don't know if you guys did, but I'm still arguing with myself. But yeah, so that's all I'm going to say about Napoles. I have them in the same place. We are now at Scrapbook. We're at your number 6, I believe.
Well, you know what's interesting? That's where I have Jose Napoles, but BL did such a great job breaking him down, and you as well, Random. I'd like to select someone else if I can, if that's allowed.
Yeah, by all means. Yeah, by all means, buddy.
I want to put in Jackie Fields, Jacob Finkelstein, born February 9th, 1908 in Chicago. And the thing with him, and he would pass away, obviously, he moved over to Las Vegas. I met him, and it's a touching moment because of the relationship I had with Jackie Fields. He was he was the kind of person that wanted to follow through on a promise. He wanted to make sure that whatever he tried to help you with, he saw it through. And that's the relationship I had with him. But he stood 5'7.5 inches. He had a 69-inch reach. He fought from 1925 to 1933. He had 86 total bouts, 72 wins, 31 knockouts, 9 losses, 2 draws, and 1 no contest. Now, the thing with him, he was formerly trained by Jack Blackburn. He boxed Jack Dempsey's gym. Jack Dempsey had a gym in Las Vegas at one point in time. It was the sporting club. And he was trained by George Blake. Now, George Blake was a very controversial referee when it came to Henry Armstrong and Severino Garcia. In California, he ruled it a draw. But he was a pretty good referee during his time. But a lot of these guys were paid off and what have you, But the thing with Jackie Fields, he had 54 total amateur bouts. He won 51 of them. At 16 years old, he won the gold medal in the 1924 Olympic Games. Between the 5th and 8th professional bout, he had 15 wins, 1 draw, and 1 loss. He had 3 fights with Johnny Lamar. Now, if you don't know who Johnny Lamar is, I advise you to look him up. He's a very, very good club fighter. Dick Hope, another good club fighter. King Tut and Jack Silver, all very good local club fighters they were. Study them. Between the 22nd and the 41st professional bout, he had 18 wins, 2 losses. 1 win and 1 loss to Sammy Mandel. 2 wins to Vince Dundee. 1 win to Mushy Callahan. 1 loss to Lewis Kid Kaplan. 1 win over Joey Silver and Baby Joe Gans. Pete Myers as well as young Jack Thompson. Between his 52nd and 86th bout, he had 21 losses. 21 matches that he fought with high caliber fighters, and there were Hall of Famers as well. Young Corbett III, 2 wins. Vince Dundee, 1 win, 1 no contest. William Gorilla Jones, 1 win. He had a match with Tommy Freeman and Joe Dundee, Sam Bruce and King Tut, Lou Bullard, and young Terry, who was from New Jersey. Young Peter Jackson, young Peter Jackson was the same fighter that Coco Kid had won the vacant colored welterweight championship strap from. Very good fighter he was. Jackie Fields was also in the International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame as well as the International Boxing Hall of Fame. I want a chance to get him in there because he's very underrated. He's a very, very good fighter, and he had good fights with young Jack Thompson. Very good fights. They went back and forth with those fights. So Jackie Fields, look him up. He was a very, very good fighter. Jacob Finkelstein.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, Random, before we jump to my number 6, I'll just add there, Scrapbook. I don't know if you've heard me mention on my channel, but Jackie Fields is a highly underrated Hall of Famer. I, again, way back in 15, 16, were prattling to someone about Jackie Fields. And I always remember I'd read an old article with Nat Fleischer, founder of Ring Magazine, because he saw a lot of boxing back then, knew a lot of fighters. And he actually said at one point, Nat Fleischer, that Jackie Fields were probably one of the finest talents that America produced in that period, in that, section of years they were fighting. Nat Fleischer thought Jackie Fields was an absolutely outstanding fighter, real quality operator. And when you add to that those names that Scrapbook reeling off people like young Peter Jackson, people may be thinking of Baltimore Demon. No, like Scrap said, it's the young Peter Jackson who was the coloured lightweight and welterweight. And I think I've got his blue screen ready that will be coming in next few months, if I remember correctly. But yeah, these are really, really tough fighters like Vince Dundee and all those other fighters he fought. So that's a great pick, Scrap. I've long been a proponent of Jackie Fields and that he deserves more credit.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, BL, I believe we've arrived at your number 6 now, right?
Yes, my number 6. Well, my number 6, was a fighter who fought one of the greatest fighters of all time, if not the greatest fighter of all time, and got beat by him twice. But in doing so, gave this great fighter a really hard tussle in one of the fights that some people found a bit contentious, and then went on to become the dominant welterweight champion of the following era after the previous great welterweight, Sugar Ray Robinson, had left to campaign full-time at middleweight. I'm talking about the Cuban Hawk, Kid Gavilan. I, again, on my channel, have been a huge proponent of Kid Gavilan, and that he is a vastly underrated fighter, whether it's fighting super tough battlers like Gene Burton, he was a very, very underrated fighter, whether it's, beating Tommy Bell, losing Sugar Ray Robinson twice, or beating the great Ike Williams, twice at welterweight when Ike Williams had nearly 100 wins, if I recall, beating the great Bo Jack, the exciting, swarming Bo Jack. You know, Kid Gavilan actually fought a really, really tough roster of fighters. You know, you're talking Billy Graham's. You know, he was a welterweight and fought a middleweight version of an outstandingly tough middleweight contender, Robert Villamain. He also, just a snip over the welterweight limit, fought George Costner, who was actually a good fighter. People remember him getting knocked out in one round by Ray Robinson, but George Costner was actually a very good fighter and actually beat Kid Gavilan. But Kid Gavilan continued his career, and like I said, after the non-title loss and then the title loss to the great Sugar Ray Robinson, you know, he battled on and fought through tough opponents, tough fighters like Tony Gennaro, Joe Micelli, really, really tough contenders who could give you a hard day. You know, he'd also fight and beat Johnny Bratton. You know, he'd also beat Billy Graham, okay, for the welterweight title. Billy Graham, I think he had 6 or 7 losses in over 100 fights. Okay, he also beat another super underrated fighter at that time, another fighter I prattled on about. He defended the welterweight title against him. That was one Bobby Dykes. Now, some people may not know Bobby Dykes, but he was a super tough fighter, and he could beat Hall of Famers or champions on his good day, believe me. And even on a fairly bad day, he could still give them nightmarish fights. Also, fighting people like Gil Turner. Gil Turner is another fighter that I've raved about, you know, for a long time. Now, Kid Gavilan beat Gil Turner when he was 31-0. And if people have been to my welterweight list and checked out Gil Turner's resume, you see what a major, major operator he was. And even fighters like Chuck Davey, you know, he fought Carmen Basilio. He beat Carmen Basilio. At middleweight, he fought Ralph Jones. Kid Gavilan, to me, is a great fighter because he challenged and gave a real tussle to many people's greatest fighter of all time, not my personal. But he then went on to become a dominant champion himself. And he has fought a highly underrated resume of super tough fighters, covering great Hall of Fame fighters and champions from lightweight to middleweight. And he, without cause or question, has fought them all. He even fought the brutal punching Argentinian fighter, Eduardo Laus, who had one of the nastiest left hooks you will ever see. And the way he set that left hook was quite chilling. He could set it up and time it on you. And if that shot hit you, you were done for. You know, he'd also lose to other Hall of Famers, middleweight champions, you know, like Carl Bobo Olsen. Just the names go on and on and on. Kid Gavilan has one of the toughest runs at welterweight. He has one of the best welterweight resumes, you know, behind the big greats in my mind. Kid Gavilan is, to me, a definite cemented number 6. My top 8 was cemented. I was arguing more over 9 and 10, but the top 8 fell into place. And Kid Gavilan, to me, worthily takes his spot on my number 6.
Oh, very nice indeed. So let's see. So where does that leave us? I'm just enjoying this so much. I'm losing track.
It's your number 6, Random.
Yeah, you're 6, Random. Bill,
so
great job. Great job. Oh, man.
Thank you, Scott.
Oh, sorry, gents. Okay, so for I struggle with this whole list. So if we arrived at my number 6, let me find my. There we go. Great Emil Griffith, who had a magnificent career, but split across. He was a great welterweight and a great middleweight. So, you know, I would have wanted to put him higher, but like his fantastic work is pretty well split between the two divisions. Both are hugely impressive. So we couldn't go any lower than this. Yeah, the great Emil Griffith. Unfortunately, you know, well, not unfortunately, but he changed his style at a certain point over the tragedy, and it's still just what a brilliant fighter and incredible, just finesse as well as just the whole package. And yep, he had to go there. So I have him at number 6, and I believe that brings us to Scrapbook. You're number 5. We're inside the top 5 now. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna put the special graphic up. Drum roll, please. You're number 5.
My number 5 is Geraldo Gonzalez, the Kid Gavilan, Cuban Hawk. Born January 6, 1926 in Cuba. He died February 13, 2003, 77 years of age. Miami, Florida. I had the pleasure of meeting him. He stood 5'10.5" weighed 130 to 155 pounds, had a total bout career of 143 fights, 108 wins, 28 knockouts, 30 losses, and 5 draws. He fought from June 5th, 1943 to July 18th, 1958. He had 11 title fights and 8 title defenses. He was in the ring with fighters such as Carmen Basilio and Gaspar Ortega, Walter Carrier, and Eugene Hairston. A very interesting name. Look him up. Quincy Zivic. He was in the ring with Johnny Greco and Joe Maselli. Laurence Dotil, Bobby Dykes. Let me tell you about the Bobby Dykes that BL had brilliantly described. Bobby Dykes and Kid Gavilan was the first mixed weight fight in the South since George Dixon fought in 1892 in the Carnival of Champions. And it was a thrilling moment because you didn't have a mixed race fight in between that time. You're talking over 60 years. So that was a monumental moment. He also was in the ring with Raymond Fuentes and Gil Turner, Chico Bijar, and Ralph Zanelli. Now, Chico Bijar, I remember when he fought a fighter by the name of Jed Black. And Chico Bijar was such a brilliant fighter. A fighter who I knew very well, Carlos Ortiz, who was an ex-lightweight champion when he took the title away from Joe Brown. Well, Carlos Ortiz sparred with Chico Bijar. He told his stories about how hard this man could punch and what brilliant foot movement he had. Very underrated fighter was Chico Bijar. Gil Turner was in the ring with the Cuban Hawk. July 7th, 1952, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. 11-round knockout. World Welterweight Championship title match. One of the greatest welterweight title matches in boxing history. What a hell of a fight that was. My God. And the thing with Kid Gavilan, May 18th, 1951, he would defeat Johnny Bratton, New York's Madison Square Garden, 15 rounds, and he would win the Welterweight Championship title match. He went 9 rounds with Ike Williams, and he had a broken jaw, Johnny Bratton. So Johnny Bratton was tough. And he was in the ring with Kid Gavilan for that title. You see, Johnny Bratton took the title away, a vacant title that Ray Robinson had vacated from Charlie Fusari. Charlie Fusari was a very good fighter. He was Ray Robinson's last title defense. And they kind of owed Charlie Fusari another opportunity. So he fought for the vacant title against Johnny Bratton. Well, Johnny Bratton would win that fight, and then he would fight Kid Gavilan, and that was a very good fight. So Kid Gavilan was in there with everyone, as BL has stated. Billy Graham, he fought them all. So he definitely deserves, I think, a high ranking in this welterweight top 10 series. So I have him ranked number 5.
Oh, very good. So yeah, we've arrived.
About.
Yes, sir. So we've arrived at your number 5.
My number 5. Well, my number 5 is. Some people may think it's a strange pick, but I do have my reasons. And it is a fighter who's been mentioned already. It's actually a UK fighter, Ted Kid Lewis, the fighter I rate as the greatest UK fighter of all time. Bar not, well, kind of, yeah, just ahead of McLaren, I rate him. Now, the thing about Ted Kid Lewis is he fought pretty much from flyweight and did challenge for Carpenter's European heavyweight title, which interestingly was at the same time he challenged for the light heavyweight title, so make of that what you will. Europe had their own titles back in that day to a point that later became pretty much the European Championship, morphed into later in some facets. But Ted Kid Lewis also did a large amount of work at welterweight along those travels, okay, from fighting great lightweights to welterweights to middleweights, light heavyweights. You know, he fought great fighters across the pond, but it's more on the welterweight work I want to focus on because I think he gets a bit underrated at welterweight. He multiple times beat former lineal champion Mike Glover. He also multiple times beat a fighter called Perry Graves. Now, some people may recognize it off sites like BoxRec as Kid Graves, but it's actually Perry Kid Graves. Now, he was one of the few fighters to beat Harry Greb, who Harry Greb did not avenge defeat to. Another one was Mike O'Dowd, who Ted Kid Lewis also fought and beat when O'Dowd was a middleweight and Ted Kid Lewis was a welterweight. Okay, he also fought super tough contenders, you know, like Sam Robidoux, Johnny Griffiths multiple times. He scored multiple wins over Johnny Griffiths, who could be a very, very tough fighter on his day. Now, of course, we all know what I'm building to. You know, Ted Kid Lewis also was a two-time lineal undisputed welterweight champion at World, and he was that courtesy of his incredible fight run with the boxing marvel Jack Britton, who is one of the greatest welterweights of all time. And Ted Kid Lewis won more than his fair share. He won a number of those fights in one of the greatest fight series in boxing history between one, the boxer puncher, okay, in Jack Britton, and the other, Ted Kid Lewis, who was more applied aggression. Okay, so you had these two great styles gelling, and in their primes, they both come up from lower weights. You know, Britain from like bantam, super bantam, Ted Kid Lewis from like flyweight, and they both come up weights, and they were both multiple-time undisputed champions, and they met in their primes. You know, this is like 1915 to 1919, 1920. This is when these two guys were in their welterweight primes, and they battled each other over and over, and both fighters could win on their day. Ted Kid Lewis twice, like I said, becoming welterweight champion, a world and lineal champion. He also multiple times, you know, beat a fighter called Jacob Soldier Barfield, a very, very underrated tough fighter who could really, really give you a handful. You know, he gave Greb an enormous handful, you know, when Soldier Barfield fought Greb. And that's one thing about him. You know, he actually fought a lot of common opponents, really. Greb, and could also beat many of the same fighters that Harry Greb beat, which to me is high praise. He could even beat somebody Greb didn't beat, like Mike O'Dowd and Petty Kid Graves. But when you add all that together, including knockout wins over outstandingly tough fighters like Lockport Jimmy Duffy, who, again, people may not be as familiar with, but people who watch my pre-rating era videos, every time I see his name, I'm saying, there he is again. Look, he's on another great fighter's resume, Lockport Jimmy Duffy, and he's got his more than his fair share of great wins himself in his career. But when you add to that, and then add that he's beating like middleweight Hall of Famers like Mike O'Dowd, he's beating fighters who Greb couldn't beat. You know, tied to that, he was a two-time champion. Tied to that, one of the greatest welterweight fight series and one of the greatest boxing rivalries of all time against a fellow great welterweight champion. Coupled to the fact he's the greatest UK fighter of all time to me. The great hitman Ted Kid Lewis is my number 5. What a great fighter he was. And to people who criticise him on the number of defeats, remember the number of defeats he suffered, like against Carpentier when he turned his head to a ref and Carpentier slotted him with a right hand, you know, and many defeats he had at welterweight and middleweight. People don't criticise Manny Pacquiao. People don't criticise Manny Pacquiao for his losses at welterweight because they say, well, he has come up from flyweight. Well, so did Ted Kid Lewis. So don't punish Ted Kid Lewis either if you're not willing to punish Manny Pacquiao. He deserves that credit as well. What a legendary fighter he was. He's my number 5.
Oh, what a fantastic decision. What a fantastic shout out. So for my number 5, let me find the graphic here. Scrap put it so beautifully. I'm not going to elaborate with Kid Gavilan's struggle between him and Griffith for this slot. But Griffith, he's such a great middleweight as well. So perhaps overall a somewhat better career, but strictly in welterweight, had to put this man here. And if I'm not mistaken, do I have this pulled up right? I do have it pulled up right. Here's a slide from your excellent channel, BL. That is quite a resume. You know, that's a tremendous number of fights against top 10, top 3 opponents. 10 fights against ring champions. I mean, this man fought a who's who. Enough of it was a welterweight. He goes in my number 5. That leads a scrapbook. Let me throw this one back up. Yes. And shout out to everyone in the chat. Hope you're having a great day. Everyone listening afterwards. And thank you, BL and Scrap, for joining me for this. This really is the highlight of my week.
Oh, yeah, the pleasure's all ours. You know, when you threw up that graphic that BL had brilliantly designed, that puts a stamp on the conversation I had about Kid Gavilan. He had fastest welterweight hands outside of Ray Robinson, as far as I'm concerned. He developed a bolo punch, and not only underneath, but over. Your Larry Temple, and you had Stefano Garcia, but Kid Gavilan threw underneath and over in a combination form. The first and only man, I think, even to this day, to do something like that. Wonderful, wonderful breakdown. And that graphic is amazing. She shows every detail of his career. Amazing, amazing. So I have him. I just happen to have him ranked how I have him ranked. But regardless, he's a hell of a fighter. He was in there in the 50s, late 40s, 50s, and he was doing what he was doing with those kind of fighters. Like I said, that fight when he fought in Philadelphia with Gil Turner told me all I needed to know about Kid Gavilan. He was amazing.
Right. And sometimes if someone's in the shadow of a legend, even if they're legendary themselves, Larry Holmes went through it. Maybe it takes a while for them to be properly remembered. Ezra Charles, I think, has been through that evolution of perception where people are like, wait a minute, this guy beat all these Hall of Famers, For the uninitiated, the great Ezra Charles, people are like, oh, the guy that lost to Rocky, the guy who has 20 wins over Hall of Fame fighters. 20 wins over people you can comfortably say are like among the all-time greats. It's absolutely insane.
Amazing.
Only the great Sugar Ray Robinson has one more than him, and then Sam Langford and the incomparable Harry Greb are a tier above everybody else. But so, but it wasn't always remembered that way. You mentioned that on our last live stream, BL, in our middleweight countdown. I think it came up.
Yes.
But people can remember the same things happen with composers and painters.
Yeah.
They're painted, like Van Gogh, you think he died with money? Just because his paintings are among the most valuable on the planet, that doesn't mean he had a easy go of it. A lot of the greats in the arts in general, including the martial arts, don't get necessarily the monetary reward proportionate to their input. But yeah, Gavilan had a fantastic career. He inherited a division, so to speak, but what a way to inherit it. So yeah, he made my number 5. BL, we have arrived. Let me throw the animation back up once more. Boom, we have arrived at your number 4, sir. We're getting down there now. We're getting down to the bits. I'm going to put up the preparatory graphic. Here we go.
I'll just shut this door.
Yeah, I didn't select the 4 yet. I was
I thought it was Scrapbook now. Yeah, it's Scrapbook.
I'm still arguing myself down to the wire on all of these top 4. I know who the top 4 are, but I just can't. Oh, I feel like I'm cheating everyone else. All right, so no wait. So Scrap, you lead. Now. So it's actually. I'm sorry, gentlemen. I'm so scattered because this is absolutely fantastic. I'm having so much fun. I'm a goofy person, so having the graphics up, having had a little bit of time to make these graphics, making this even more fun for me. Hopefully, hopefully it's helping the viewers too, just engage and just be like, okay, this isn't boring, farty old people talk. I mean, we're talking about people fighting each other for money, and so it's as exciting as sports gets, and it's also high level martial arts. So there's like an intersection there between something practical, utilitarian, and then something beautiful and creative, and it's just a combat sports are just so much fun. So I appreciate everyone listening. I appreciate you guys' time. Okay, so now we've got the curtain of fire. BL, would you like to unveil your number 4, sir?
Yeah, I gotta choose my 4.
Because... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Scrap. I immediately reverted back. By all means.
Man, you got a lot going on your side, so don't worry about it, man.
Yes, sir. I can't wield this.
This 4 that I'm gonna choose is important. That's why I want to get him out there. He was mentioned earlier in the conversation, but I just want to break him down a little bit more because I'm very impressed with him. A couple things he didn't do that I'm a little angry with him with, but all in all, as a fighter, I'm very impressed with him. His name was Edward Patrick Walker, Mickey Walker, the toy bulldog. 5 world welterweight fights and 4 defenses. Born July 13th, 1901, lived in New Jersey. He died April 28th, 1981. He stood 5'7", had a 67-inch reach. He was welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight, and fought his highest heavyweight. Had a total bout career of 164 fights, 131 wins, 60 knockouts, 25 losses, and 6 draws. was in the Boxing Hall of Fame in 1955, the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 1990. He fought fighters such as Johnny the Cleveland Boy Baker Risco. Now that man right there could fight. He was from Cleveland. He was in the ring with Max Schmeling. Now he was stopped with Max Schmeling, but he put up a good account of himself. He was in the ring with Maxie Rosenblum and Jack Sharkey. He went 12 rounds with, well, 15 rounds with Jack Sharkey, and he called it a draw. He was in the ring with Ed Bearcat Wright and Lou Bullard, as well as Bob Goodwin, Young Corbett III, and Nady Brown. July 18th, 1921, he faced Jack Britton in Newark, New Jersey. It was a 12-round no-decision contest. 1922, he was in the ring with Jacob Soldier Barfield 3 times, Johnny Griffin twice, Powell Reed, and Jack Malone. He was also in the ring with Wildcat Nelson. He fought March 22nd, 1923, against Pete Latzo, 12-round no-decision contest in Newark, New Jersey. Pete Latzo was very underrated as well. He wound up fighting Tommy Loughran and others, but he was a very good fighter. He wound up becoming a welterweight champion. Now, Mickey Walker had faced Jack Britton in November, and he won a welterweight championship crown, defeated him in 15 rounds. Jack Britton, the boxing marble, as BL had alluded to, was in the ring with Ted Kit Lewis 20 times. So Mickey Walker was in there with some of the greats. I'll give you another example. October 8th, 1923, he was in the ring with Jimmy Jones, Newark, New Jersey, 10 rounds, no contest. It was for the NBA crown. January 2nd, 1924, he was in the ring with Lou Tendler in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was for the NBA crown. January 7th, 1925, he was in the ring with Mike T, who wound up becoming a light heavyweight champion with a defeated battle in Shiki in Ireland. Newark, New Jersey, they fought 10 rounds, no decision contest. July 2nd, 1925, he was in the ring with Harry Greb at New York's Madison Square Garden. They lost him in 15 rounds. It was for the middleweight championship crown. Now, they fought twice, and in between those fights, Harry Greb and Mickey Walker, they hung one up in a cafe, and they wound up having a fight outside, a real street fight. So Mickey Walker was the goods. You know, he really had the animal instinct inside of him. February 30th, 1927, he fought Tommy Milliken. Tommy Milliken from London, pretty decent fighter, but he wound up stopping him. He was also in the ring with Paul Berlenbach. Paul Berlenbach had defeated Mike McKee for the light heavyweight championship crown. Paul Berlenbach was from Astoria, Queens. He was a very good light heavyweight. Fought him November 25th, 1927 in Chicago. Defeated him in 10 rounds. May 20th, 1926, he was in the ring with Pete Latzo in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Lost him in 10 rounds and lost the welterweight championship title. June 24th, 1926, he was in the ring with Dundee, New York, 8 rounds, and he wound up losing that fight. December 3rd, 1926, he defeated Tiger Flowers, Chicago, 10 rounds, and he would beat him for the middleweight championship crown. So I just wanted to mention Detroit Bulldog Mickey Walker. He was an outstanding fighter, short for his size. As a matter of fact, he was the same height as Tommy Brusso. Tommy, what's his name, the heavyweight who lost to Jack Johnson from Canada. Can't think of his name now. But he was the same height as he was. So Mickey Walker was an outstanding fighter. I have him ranked number 4, and I just wanted to mention him on this list. So thanks for giving me that opportunity.
Oh, that was wonderful.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, BL.
Go right ahead, BL. Take the
No, I
floor.
was just going to say, Scrapbook, you're preaching to my choir. Mickey Walker, I love Mickey Walker. You know, any welterweight champion who can stand there, lose, but stand there and trade punches with Matt Schmeling, a Hall of Fame heavyweight champion, to me, deserves credit, as well as being a 2-division undisputed champion, challenge for light heavyweight title. And actually, Scrapbook, a fighter you rate as a good heavyweight, Bearcat Wright, you'll know Scrapbook. He actually dropped Mickey Walker really badly in first round, I think it was.
Yes.
And Mickey Walker were all at sea, and he managed to get through round. But then in next round, Mickey Walker drops Bearcat Wright, who was a big, strong heavyweight. Incredible. Mickey Walker as well, to back what Scrap said there, is he had a winning record against the heavyweights he fought, which is insane. It's crazy. So, you know, yeah, he's great. Great shout out, Scrap. Real great shout out. Yeah,
thank you. And the heavyweight I was thinking of was Tommy Burns. I couldn't get him out of my head there. Tommy Burns and Mickey Walker were both 5'7", and I found out to be incredible. So Mickey Walker deserves a lot of credit. He was a very good fighter. Very good fighter.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an excellent pair of shout outs, guys. Well done. And you know, with some of these great fighters that traveled, especially between welterweight and middleweight, it seems to be a thing. Just that it's just that area where as people grow and get their full size, they you know, their adult strength. There's just a natural transition for like sort of the size men that boxing has the pick of. You know, in the sporting realm, you know, that sort of size person. Same thing in mixed rules and mixed martial arts. Those weight classes are just intensely competitive around that size. And what a great fighter he was. I almost had Stanley Ketchel inside 10. I couldn't put him in there and leave McLaren or Ray Leonard out because Ketchel, his middleweight body, I had him in my middleweight top 10, but I couldn't quite squeeze him in here. But I did want to throw the graphic up because look at that face. He was a serious dude. He fought the great Jack Johnson, prime Jack Johnson. He's a tiny dude compared to Johnson, who was really good at fiddling with even larger guys. And like Johnson he was just so brilliant. He could just shut people down. He could punish them at will. In the fight, Ketchel dropped him, and then Johnson got mad and just got up and immediately hit him with just, you know, he ended it completely. But Ketchel had,
you know, Random. To mention a funny story, Scrapbook's probably come across this in all his vast research, but you know, Stanley Ketchel actually weighed in for Johnson fight with a big suit on, and he looked like Hulk Hogan because he'd actually got this suit on and he'd piled clothes underneath to make him look physically bigger, so it didn't look quite so comical when they were weighing in. Ketchel had about 6 layers on to make him look bulky. That's how small he was. Incredible fighter.
And he had high heels, BL, as well. Cowboy boots.
Yeah. Yeah, what a character. And I'll just say on Ketchel as well, you know, it's welterweight talk, but just on Ketchel, what you mentioned there, if he hadn't been shot and killed at 23, another 7 or 8 years on him, he would have run headfirst into Greb, O'Dowd, Klaus, Darcy, you know, Clabby, Jeff Smith. He could have built one of the greatest resumes of all time by age of 30, without a doubt.
Yeah, he got cut off young, and he already had a world-class Hall of Fame-worthy resume.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm going to sting some people here, but people rave that Salvador Sanchez, who died at guess what age, 23, is some kind of legendary fighter, and yet many people don't realize that comparing Sanchez's resume, just in my opinion only, can't compare to Ketchel's. Ketchel didn't fight at one weight like Sanchez. He actually fought pretty much from middleweight up to heavyweight, and scored many great wins and a great fight series. So I think Ketchel outdid Salvador Sanchez by age 23, you know, showing what a great fighter he was and what he would have probably gone on to become.
Oh, nice. Well put.
Oh, yeah, Ketchel, yeah. Oh.
So if we hit my number 4, is that where we are now?
It's my number 4 now.
Oh, I'm sorry. Be my guest.
I'm all excited because Scrapbook knows how much I love this fighter. And Random probably does as well. Okay. The 6-time undisputed champion, Emil Griffith. I love this guy. I love this guy's career. I love this guy's capabilities. I love the fact that this guy challenged himself in multiple divisions and even past his prime. But let's just go back a bit, okay? I want to point out one historical acclaim Emil Griffith achieved. He is only the 2nd fighter in boxing history, the entire history at welterweight division, to be a 3-time undisputed champion. The other one I will discuss on my next pick, okay? But Emil Griffith is only one of only 2 fighters. There's many 2-time welterweight champions, okay, from Atlanta, on and on, too many to mention. And there's been 4-time champions like Pacquiao, but of single belts. Emil Griffith is only the 2nd fighter. He's tied with Jack Britton as being the only fighter in boxing history to be undisputed welterweight champion on 3 occasions. Now, when you can achieve that while winning one of the most brutal welterweight trilogies of all time, the trilogy with Benny Kid Paret that tragically ended in a tragedy. You know, when you can do that, coming off great victories over tough contenders like Jorge Fernandez, Gaspar Ortega, who's an outstanding fighter, and another ridiculously underrated fighter, Luis Manuel Rodriguez, okay, who, you know, when Emil Griffith first beat him with 35-0, Luis Rodriguez would win the titles off Emil Griffith, allowing Griffith to win the titles back off Luis Rodriguez. Luis Rodriguez had gone to be a very highly rated middleweight contender who had a Hall of Fame career himself. He also fought the outstanding fighter Florentino Fernandez, okay, an absolutely outstanding fighter. Fought people like Yama Bahama, another of my blue screens to come. Also fought and beat people like Isaac Logart, who was also a very, very underrated fighter. Beat Ralph Dupas, okay, you know, in a welterweight title fight over 15 rounds. You know, to me, Emil Griffith sums up the term great fighter. Started out, hit the running quick, okay. In 20 pro fights, he was already fighting multiple rated fighters. By 40 pro fights, he'd already been a 3-time welterweight champion. He'd already forayed at like middleweight and middleweight. In fact, if I remember, Yama Bahama was the first top 10 rated middleweight Emil Griffith beat, if I remember correctly, rated by Ring Magazine. But from then on, he went on to become the inaugural light middleweight champion. He went on to become a 2-time undisputed middleweight champion, beating fighters like the outstanding Dick Tiger, okay, more than once. You know, losing a trilogy to Nino Benvenuti. Okay, Benvenuti were a multiple-time undisputed champion at light middleweight and middleweight. And in the first Benvenuti fight, Benvenuti was 71-1. Okay, to give you an idea. Now, Griffith lost that fight, came back and beat Benvenuti. But when you can go on to do that on the back of the explosive trilogy with Paret, on the back of the fight series with the great Luis Manuel Rodriguez, tough contenders like Gaspar Ortega, Florentino Fernandez, Brian Curvis. He also fought the Dartford Destroyer, okay, the good southpaw Dave Shanley, okay, from UK shores. Dave Shanley was actually a really good fighter himself. You know, and when you add that, you know, Isaac Logarts and all these other fighters, even going on past his prime, even later after twice challenging the great middleweight King Carlos Monzon, losing the first fight, giving a better account in the second fight, even then later to challenge the great Jose Napoles himself. You know, I mean, in his later career, challenge Jose Napoles himself. Emil Griffith, to me, is what is encapsulated by the term Hall of Famer. Okay, multiple weights, fought multiple Hall of Fame fighters across multiple ways, had great trilogies, okay, with Benvenuti, you know, with Paret, a 4-fight series with Luis Rodriguez, he won 3 of them, you know, setting historical precedent, only the second fighter in boxing history to be a 3-time welterweight champion. You know, like I said, Mysterious Billy Smith and others have been 2-time champions. Emil Griffith, total great fighter. I love him to bits. I'm very jealous of my buddy Scrapbook because he's met him a number of times. I would have loved to have sat and talked to this great legendary fighter, Emil Griffith. But what can you say? 6-time undisputed champion. You know, there's only a few fighters who've even matched that or come close to that. I think that says a lot.
And BL, can I add? First of all, great breakdown. Phenomenal breakdown. But I just want to add, when Emil Griffith had that fight in '62 with Benny Kid Paret, he was depressed. And Gil Clancy took him up to the Concord Hotel for a week to get his mind right. Because his next opponent was a man you just mentioned, Ralph Dupas. Ralph Dupas was very underrated. He was very strong. And they knew that he had to be mentally prepared for Ralph Dupas. And he defeated him. That showed me a lot about Emil Griffith's character, his poise, his personality, and the mark of a champion. So that was a great run by Emil Griffith in 1962, 1963. Phenomenal fighter he was.
Yeah, because if I remember, he had a much tougher fight the first time, didn't he, with Dupas? I think, was it a 15-round point win? But then, didn't he knock him out in early rounds in second fight they had?
Yes.
Was that in 63 or 64? And Ralph Dupas for a former undisputed light middle champ. Very tough fighter, very good resume. So, yeah, absolutely. Ralph Dupas, you're right, Scrap. Very underrated fighter indeed.
Oh, fantastic, guys. I'm loving this conversation. Thanks for listening, everybody. Spending a little time with us as we rant about all these great fighters. I hope it's a worthwhile conversation. Maybe some of the people you hear about, just like myself, I listened to an awful lot of BL and Scrapbook, and then I was like, I should just go look at let me go look at some of the sources and read. And now I'm like, all like I pay to be in the newspaper archives to like read the writers of the time reporting on different fights and who's trying to book fights, who's ducking who, and all this stuff. Same stuff that goes on today, but everything was happening a lot faster then. You guys know this. Fights would come together in like 2 weeks. That wasn't unusual. They'd be like, the something something athletic, club in this some town is trying to match this guy with this guy for 2 weeks from now. That was normal. Sam Langford, he didn't have like a whole year booked out for him. He got 27 trips to the ring, but it wasn't all like set at the beginning of the year. It wasn't sculpted like that. He just took every fight he could. He was affiliated with the Lennox, which later changed its name, but we just called it the Lennox. He was getting fights from them, from his eventual manager, and then he was getting fights from other athletic clubs, sometimes twice in a week. At least once that year, he fought twice in the same night. So some of these guys fought seasons, and that leads me into my number 4. And this is great. Yeah, that's right, Haplo. Fights would come together faster and better fights. Yeah, because people were hungry and it was a live gate era, so you had to fight to eat. Most people weren't even film rights weren't anything for most boxers. It was a live gate and side bets. So
And
you
they
had
would
to
have
get in either way.
contracts, Random. I'm sorry. They have contracts waiting for you in the locker room. When you came back from that fight, from the ring, they would have contracts waiting for you in the locker room, ready to go for the next fight.
Exactly. Yeah, these guys were busy. This was thriving. I love reading the reports of the time because everything was happening so fast. All this wonderful texture, and then you have guys like Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, who was just like he was doing a lot of 6-round fights, but he was doing this meteor, just this cutting this huge swathe across like a couple of divisions, middleweight and light heavy, and just with this ridiculous schedule. His 1902 is something else. The names on it, you just be like, good God, how did you fit that? It's one of Harry Grebb's years. But anyway, I want to lead in. Speaking of seasons, I'm leading into my number 4 here. Let me find the graphic for this great fighter. My goodness. I went with Peerless Jack Britton, the boxing marvel Jack Britton. I saw him described. That's how they referred to him in one of the articles I saw. They were like Peerless Jack Britton. I was like, holy cow. This guy was brilliant, and he fought seasons of boxing. He was really one of the guys who did it best. And so his win-loss record should definitely be seen. His overall numerical record should definitely be seen in the context of he's fighting a ton of fights every year. So you can lose once or twice every year. Not every year, but you can lose once or twice in a year. If you win, 14 or 15 fights, well, you still had a great season. He's actually doing a season just like in team sports. When you're doing a real season, it's not about going undefeated. Oh, thanks, Isaac K. It's my pleasure having these two great characters on here to talk boxing. I'm still learning, but I got inspired by them probably 3.5 years ago now, and now I'm doing my little research, at least in a very limited time in boxing history, the early 1900s. Doing this is an absolute pleasure, but I'm definitely way out of my depth. But this is great, sink or swim. We're going forward. So I picked Britain. It was hard to put anyone above him because he had so many fights, either against welterweights, whether or not he was at the limit yet, or as a welterweight against larger people than himself, both of which would factor to me, like judging like what was his essence as a welterweight. Sometimes these guys are still in the class below and they just fight someone who's there. Barbados Walcott and other fighters did that. Ray Robinson did that when he was a welter, fought his way up to middleweight contention. The brackets, the great Archie Moore fought his way up to heavyweight contention as the reigning light heavyweight champ. But that's a different discussion. We should do the light heavyweights, guys. What a discussion, Oh my goodness.
Oh,
But
I'm
anyway,
all for it.
yeah, but there's other divisions
Actually,
too.
I was thinking possibly about light heavyweights as our maybe next encounter.
Anything that would give me a chance to talk about Philadelphia Jack O'Brien's incredible 1902 and his whole career. Let's absolutely. Well, I'm down for it if you guys are.
Count
But I
me
had
in.
fantastic. You guys tell me when. You know my schedule. So Jack Britton made my number 4. It was hard to put anyone above him. There are 3 also all-time great fighters. Now, Britton didn't just fight at welterweight, so this isn't really like a pound for pound rating. He's like extremely high. In fact, he's number 5, if I'm not mistaken, beyond your all-time in your automated top 1,000 of all time, your updated strength of competition adjusted top 1,000. Is that correct? Jack Britton's number 5.
Yeah, he's very high. I think he is 5. Yeah.
I jotted notes. But I was moving so quickly by the end there. I just wanted to make sure I had it right.
Aplo,
Yeah. So
sorry, Random, if I can do a shameless plug. People can see where he rates in my top 10 on my new published website. Sorry, carry on. Just a shameless plug, I hope you don't mind.
we have no shame about that. You plug away. You talk about you can just go ahead and talk about your website for a while if you want. I'm done with my number 4, and because unless I've misjudged, he's about to show up somewhere in your next several
Yeah,
picks.
he will indeed show up, buddy. So I'll let it go to Scrapbook and for his number 3.
Yeah, I was going to print out his career and try and read off his significant fights, and I was like, we don't have time, and it's much better for you to be able to condense it with your expertise. So I knew he was coming. I'm not going to say anything more about him. So now we've completed the round of 4. And here we go. And there are lots of great fighters, maybe some who only passed through welterweight that we have not mentioned. This was difficult. You know, I just threw a few great fighters who spent some time at welterweight out there on that graphic, but I'm going to keep it animated. So bring back the curtain of fire. Imaginary drum roll, Scrapbook. Are we? If I'm not mistaken, we're at your number 3 greatest
sir.
welterweight.
Yes, sir. My number 3 greatest welterweight is the Barbados Demon, the Barbados Wonder. They call him the Black Demon and the Black Boy Wonder. Joe Walcott, born March 13th, 1873 in British Barbados. He died October 4th, 1935. He was 62 years of age at the time of his death. And he resided in Ohio. He stood 5 foot 1 inch, had a 64-inch reach. He was a welterweight, had a total bout career of 154 fights, 96 wins, 57 knockouts, and 31 losses. He had 27 draws. When I explain to you the fighters he fought, you'll understand his career. And as a martial arts wrestler, 1887 to 1889. Between 1890 and 1896, he began boxing in New York and Boston, Massachusetts. He faced George Kid Lavin, Mysterious Billy Smith. Walcott had hired welter and middleweight Tommy West as a sparring partner. He was roommates with Jack Johnson. He taught Jack Johnson tricks of the trades, as did Joe Chowinski did. October 4th, 1904 and 1906. Now, October 29th, 1897, he would fight in the Lenox Athletic Club. And he was in the ring with George Kid Lavin, and he was stopped. San Francisco, 12 rounds for the World Lightweight Championship crown. January 16th, 1897, he had a 6-round no decision contest over the colored lightweight champion, Bobby Dobbs. December 6, 1898, he lost in 20 rounds, World Welterweight Championship title contest over Mysterious Billy Smith. He was in the ring with Dan Creedon 4 times, knocked out Joe Chowinski in 7 rounds. What was interesting about that, and that took place in 1900, was that Jack Johnson was knocked out in 3 rounds by Joe Chowinski. But Joe Walcott knocked out Joe Chowinski in 7 rounds. That is fascinating. He was in the ring with Joe Gans, George Cole, the legendary Sam Langford, young Peter Jackson, that's the Baltimore Demon, Black Bill, and Dave Holly. He was also in the ring with the Dixie Kid. That's a very interesting fight that took place in 1904. And unfortunately for Joe Walcott, he was railroaded because you had Dick O'Sullivan, who was the referee, decided that he had money on that fight, and he tried to rob Joe Walcott of that fight. They got wind of it, and the decision was reversed. And Joe Walcott would wind up fighting Dixie Kid again, who would become welterweight champion of the world. He was in the ring with Tommy West, and I mentioned Billy Smith, George Gardner, Sandy Ferguson, Larry Temple, Philadelphia Jack O'Brien. That's the tip of the iceberg of what Joe Walcott has done to fulfill his legacy. Black Bill, Frank Childs, and many, many others. So I have him ranked number 3. He's the greatest welterweight of my years of studying the game of boxing.
Fantastic. That was a pleasure to listen to. BL, we've arrived.
Yeah. That were great from Scrapbook Boxing. And, you know, I just echoing what Scrap said there. I mean, he is a legendary fighter, and as I think I mentioned earlier, I'm actually currently getting his pre-era rating video ready, and people who watch that video are going to be shocked at the amount of pound for pounders he fought, the amount of fights he had against really tough opposition. You know, some of those slides are deep in opposition, really deep, where he's fighting fighters at either welterweight, then light heavyweight, then middleweight, then 2 at welterweight, then 1 at middleweight, and he's fighting fighters who title anything from lightweight to light heavyweight. I mean, it's incredible, really, but his weight doesn't change much. He'll drift up 2 or 3 pounds, drop down a pound, you know, around the welterweight limit. Some fights he'll come in at 144, 145. Another he might come in at 148, and he's fighting a light heavyweight or a high middleweight, you know, weighing like 162. Because I keep trying to tell people that's not light heavyweight in those days. That's a middleweight fight, you know. So, you know, it's like incredible. I will glow on him when I do that pre-rating era video, because he's one of boxing's legendary fighters. And one thing I really like what Scrapbook pointed out, I was telling someone back in day, going through old newspaper archives, thousands of them I were going through in 1890s. And it's incredible how highly regarded he was as a fighter. You know, he stood 5'1", and actually fans now say, oh, this guy's got 3-inch reach, this guy ain't got a chance. Walcott was 5'1", and he would stoop a little bit. He'd stoop a little bit and make him send a low center of gravity, low target. So fighters had to try and punch down. Now, when you combine that with his ability to swing out to his left and club you with vicious left hooks, or leap in with them brutal overhand rights, he would come in at speed and fire overhand rights. It was shot. He got Choinski in 7th round that finished him after that brutal fight there that knocked Choinski's eyes white. He just fell like he'd been shot. You know, I mean, Barbados Walcott had speed. He was tough as they come. He could fight heavyweights. He could fight light heavyweights. He feared no man. And he could also, he maintained, like Langford, he maintained punching power, that even fighting bigger fighters, much bigger fighters, 20, 30 pounds heavier, he could physically hurt him. He could famously make, Tom Sharkey, the heavyweight from late 1890s. He was actually visibly making Tom Sharkey grunt in pain from body shots in sparring. You are talking about a legendary fighter, Barbados Walcott. Great breakdown, Scrapbook, and it's nice. I don't have him as high in mine, but it's nice to see him getting credit as being highly rated at number 3 on someone's list, for sure.
I just want to chime in. I don't know if this was definitely immature, but it reminds me of the Tyson quote where he's like, he was making woman gestures. You know, he was like, because he was hitting the guy so hard in the body, you know. So, yeah, Walcott could make people like. Anyway, I haven't mentioned Joe Walcott yet, so I will say no more right now. BL, we've arrived at your number 3, sir. Hold on, let me find the neutral graphic, because all of these took a while to do, so I want to use all of them at least once. Here we go. Drum roll. Your number 3 of all time.
My number 3 is the boxing marvel Jack Britton. I mentioned that Emil Griffith was only the 2nd fighter in boxing history to be a 3-time lineal undisputed welterweight champion. So because I give enormous credit and praise for Emil Griffith's incredible career, I remember, just quickly before I get on to Britain, I was listening to a live stream where there was a guy on the live stream saying, well, Emil Griffith is not a great welterweight because he didn't really fight anybody. When I got off the floor with hysterical butt clenching laughter breaking out spontaneously all over me, you know, that's what made me realize. But you know, I rate Emil Griffith so highly, and therefore I have the same respect for the boxing marvel Jack Britton, who surpassed other fighters to become the first 3-time champion. And like I mentioned on Ted Kid Lewis, so I don't really need to go over Ted Kid Lewis thing, but that massive fight series with one of boxing's all-time great fighters, Ted Kid Lewis, both in their primes, both after coming up in weight, both swapping that lineal undisputed welterweight title between them. And they were tough fights. When you read those fight reports, they were tough fights. They were back and forward fights. Britain would have advantage for a few rounds. Then Ted Kid Lewis would have a good round. Then Britain would force him back for 2. Then Ted Kid Lewis would win next 2. A lot of them fights were really, really tough fights. 2 in prime all-time greats. Now we argue and or pass comments sometimes on fighters about when fighters are past the prime, and many fighters in boxing history do fight Hall of Famers or all-time greats past the prime. So some people say, well, that win don't mean as much. Every single win Britain and Lewis scored against each other is an all-time great win because they were both in their prime. They swapped that world welterweight title in one of the greatest fight series of all time. Now, another thing about Jack Britain is, you know, a lot of people would say, well, who did he beat? You know, he has one of the biggest resumes in boxing history. Okay, who did he beat? Well, just a roll call for you. He beat Eddie Shevlin. He beat former champ Mike Glover. He beat Johnny Griffiths. He beat Kid Graves and Mike O'Dowd. Just like Ted Kid Lewis, he also beat the 2 fighters that Harry Greb didn't beat. He also beat the super tough lightweight UK fighter who I say is vastly underrated in UK, Charlie White, a lightweight contender, super tough fighter, great resume himself. He's in my Hall of Fame on my new website. Sorry, I'll stop shameless plugs there. But he also beat Soldier Barfield. He also beat Lockport Jimmy Duffy. Okay, he won and lost to Lockport Jimmy Duffy. That's that name cropping up again. You know, he also fought and beat Brian Downey, a former middleweight contender, a good fighter. Beat Benny Leonard at welterweight, yes, with the controversy, but it is what it is. Also beat tough fighters, really, really tough fighters like Phil Kaplan, Jock Malone. Also fought other fighters like Mickey Walker, Dave Shade, and the very underrated Lupo Gash. So when you're looking at Jack Britain, you are looking at a fighter who has one of the biggest resumes of all time. He set an historical precedent that stood for nearly 50 years, okay, until Emil Griffith matched it. An historical precedent that's been matched by one fighter but never been beaten. 3-time undisputed welterweight champion, the first 3-time lineal champion as well. So add that to that incredible resume and the fact he was one of the great boxer punchers of his time. You know, a fantastic tactical fighter, you know, like I said, coupled with Ted Kid Lewis's educated aggression, I'll call it. Educated aggression of Ted Kid Lewis and Ted Kid Lewis's momentum. You know, Jack Britain to me has to sit inside the top 3. Me personally, I can't put him any lower than that, based on that incredible body of work and the incredible success. And another thing to note as well, I want one last point on Jack Britain. Now, a lot of people quote the world title fights. I just want to just quickly put my take on it, because Jack Britain had a number of title fights that were viewed as no decisions, okay, because no knockout happened. Now, many people don't count those as title fights, but I actually do. And the reason why I do is the title was on the line, okay? Jack Britain put his title on the line against, say, Ted Kid Lewis. And if Ted Kid Lewis knocked him out, the title was going to Ted Kid Lewis. It was a title fight. The fact that Ted Kid Lewis could not knock him out and therefore gain the title, to me, pretty much means it's a title defense. Some people strip him of those defenses saying, oh, no, it's a no decision. And I'm like, yeah, but what if Ted Kid Lewis would have knocked him out? Ted Kid Lewis would have been champion, yeah? And they're like, yes. I'm like, well, is it not a title defense then? Because not by being knocked out and going the distance and it going to no decision, he has actually defended his title by not getting knocked out. So, you know, that's one thing I consider that some people don't. But, you know, based on the title record, he has one of the highest runs of title defenses in welterweight history. He has the highest number of welterweight title fights in welterweight history. So, you know, add that to his incredible resume and his incredible list of opponents. I have Jack Britain number 3. And I do apologise, guys. I'm wittering on tonight. I think it's because I'm tired, so my brain's just going overload. But I love these discussions. So, yeah, you know, Jack Britain's my number 3.
No, keep going, BL. Don't do that. Absolutely. You're doing a great job. Great job. Random,
yeah, please, guys. And you, yeah, I sent you both my... Oh, sorry, gents. I sent you both my list, so you know who I have graphic. You can shout out anybody on that list. Like when we're done, we can do the shout outs, close calls. You know, because there are more than 10 incredibly great fighters, way more than 10 that have fought in this division. So it's all subjective. For those that missed the very beginning, we didn't set any criteria. We're not We're too old for that stuff. So it's just whatever we feel like. It's on our whim. This isn't. We're not attempting to rate like specifically like the 10 greatest resumes strictly at welterweight. It's just whatever greatness meant to us the night which is probably tonight as we finalize our list going into the actual discussion. I've still been finalizing mine. So how would I ever if so we're now at my number 3. How could I possibly put anyone over Jack Britton, this great fighter, this cool-headed, just brilliant, peerless, stylist of his day who fought full seasons? Well, the only way I could think of, there's only 3 instances I can think of where someone could possibly pierce that just vast wall of greatness and ascend to number 3 above them. And I am talking about the Barbados wonder, Joe Walcott, one of the most important stylists of the early gloved era. He was a wrestler, an amateur wrestler, and as a pro boxer, he just when he was a lightweight, he was like a Tom O'Rourke, a powerful manager. He was his protege. He was a lightweight. He was the Barbados wonder. He'd take on. He was fighting. Oh my goodness, he was fighting welterweights and middleweights while he was still like a kind of a fairly new lightweight. He was already going at it. Had some great fights. BL, he did some fantastic breakdowns of Walcott's fights, the action in the fights. That must be when you were talking about going through all the newspaper articles. You had wonderful the action round to round in all these fights. But then this was before he was even a welterweight. He went on to become one of the great welterweight sized fighters, but he wasn't particularly large. He missed parts of his prime because he shot himself in the hand in 1904. But that same year, he fought the also great Sam Langford, a young Sam Langford who had beaten Joe Gans. He also fought 20 rounds draw against Joe Gans himself, which was like one of the biggest super fights you could ever make as far as great fighters. That's literally, that's almost as good as it gets, where you have Joe Gans, one of the most influential stylists ever, and Joe Walcott, a very unique build, 5'1.5", with just a giant upper body for a man his height, but also very skilled and ferocious. And he could punish people. He could punish you for trying to, like BL, like you said, with his crouching style. He could punish the top of the head, So lots of men ruin their hands trying to punch this guy in the face, and instead meeting the top of that little head and just. He was ferocious coming in. He could wail, but he could also make it himself hard to hit. But he could give and give back, and he had a great chin, and he was resilient, and he just pushed the boundaries. And so when I think of greatness, Jack Britton was fantastic, but I couldn't put Joe Walcott below him because Joe Walcott was doing stuff. He was fighting above welterweight before he was even a welterweight. When he was a welterweight, he was just going crazy. He challenged for the colored heavyweight title. And I'm not even sure, he might have still been a lightweight when he did that. He didn't win, but it was like the reports in the paper, they were in awe of the fact that he would have the guts to try it, giving up 30 or 40 pounds to a really world-class fighter as a little dude.
I also have to address, I have to point out something else, about the racial aspect. I don't like to do it normally, but it is really, really important, especially in cases like this, to point out the adversity that this fighter had to face. Because I've spoke about it many times. I've spoke about it on Johnson and Langford and many, but Barbados Walcott, he showed up at an arena and was not allowed cornermen. They had to glove him up, at the doors to the arena, and he had to walk to the arena on his own. He could not be given any slices of orange or grapefruit in between the rounds. He had no handlers there to towel him down to try and keep him cool in the arena. And also another thing with Barbados Walcott is I did heavy research into him. The 2 videos you mentioned where I document through archives many of his fights round by round and what happened in them. And like I said to you earlier, Random, I did haplotyping chat, remember, on my old channel. I did it like a 3-hour-long live stream doing the same with Langford. But Barbados Walcott, I did heavy research into a lot of those fights. And a lot of those draws and a number of those losses were actually should have been wins. And when I calculated through, like there were one young contender because Barbados Walcott was a terrifying fighter. When he let his hands go, light heavyweight Hall of Famer Joe Choyinski couldn't deal with it. Okay, middleweight George Gardner couldn't deal with it. So when you're fighting lightweight and welterweight contenders or upcoming prospects, and they face those brutal two-handed assaults, because Walcott was a very clever fighter, very clever at applying that left hook, very clever with that leaping in overhand right. But, you know, at times when he were fighting Mysterious Billy Smith in the fight that's called a draw, which to a lot of people there, Walcott easily won it, dominated round after round, slamming Mysterious Billy Smith, timing him with like check hooks. You know, hitting him with left hooks and then getting out of ways as Mysterious Billy Smith came in. You know, but then Walcott was smiling at him. Every time he slotted him with a really heavy shot and caught him, he was smiling at him. Walcott had him licked. The fight were a draw. And when I calculated through, actually, I think it was 9 of his losses and 10 of his draws should actually be off that column and on the win column. This is fighters, okay, who get knocked out and it's called a draw. Or a fighter who keeps falling to the floor and then refuses to get up, the fight being called a draw. Barbados Walcott also had to endure that outrageous behavior, which to me doesn't diminish his greatness, but it is worth pointing out that everything he achieved, like I mentioned with Johnson, Langford, and all of these fighters in that early era, from Sam Boland, the outstanding Sam Boland, to, you know, Bobby Dobbs, Gans, they all had to put up with it. And when they build the careers they build while facing that adversity, to me, it just heightens their greatness. You know, Barbados Walcott is a legendary fighter. He had a very hard time. One last point. Someone once came to me on a channel that you two guys may not have known. He's been gone a number of years now. But he did a response to me saying that in no way, shape or form did Floyd Mayweather have any advantages prior to his pro career than Barbados Walcott had. And I said, well, what about the extensive multi-year amateur career? What about all the talented world-class sparring with fighters like Pernell Whitaker at the best gyms with the best gear, all the preparation, the best training, the best food, money backing him, proper nutrition? Floyd had every advantage over Barbados Walcott. And basically, you know, Barbados Walcott achieved what he achieved. Legendary fighter.
Yeah,
Standing
absolutely.
ovation to you, BL. Great
Yeah,
job.
that was, and you know, Sam Langford, Jack Johnson, those are two, and Joe Gans. Everyone who was at the absolute top had the greatest respect for Joe Walcott. He was ferocious, and
Jack
and
Johnson said at one point, he were friends with Barbados Joe, but Jack Johnson said at one point, I think it was early 1920s, that the greatest fighter he had ever seen was Barbados Joe Walcott.
yeah, and Langford gave Walcott credit. It later, a couple decades after they fought, actually, yeah, 20 years after they fought, 1924, he said that, you know, he never hit anyone more. No one ever hit him more than the rounds they fought.
Sam Langford said in one interview, boy, that baby could hit.
Yeah, Joe Walcott, he really was, you know, he was also called the Barbados Demon, but the papers had a habit of doing that with a lot of black fighters. They would be the this and that demon, and some would also take it willingly. I mean, it was all marketing, so it's like you see it in pro wrestling. Sometimes they kind of ride the line. Like, that's a little bit.
I think it was a great point, you know, Random, to back your point there. What Scrapbook mentioned it earlier, and I didn't jump on it to give him credit for it. In the early to mid 1890s, he was known as the Barbados Wonder. That is how outrageously good he was. I think he only lost one of his first 40 pro fights, and he was destroying and wiping out a lot of people inside 2 rounds in that time as well. They actually referred to him as Barbados Wonder. And, you know, the 2 George Kidd Levine fights that Scrap mentioned, George Kidd Levine were a very tough lightweight, an experienced lightweight. But, you know, he had to sign contracts where if it went the distance, he automatically lost. And, you know, in one of those fights, Walcott threw the kitchen sink at him, but he had to drain down to a weight below lightweight. And, you know, by round 10, 11, you know, the people watching the fight said, he's thrown everything at kitchen sink to get Levine out of there, but he's just run out of juice. He's lost his strength. He's lost his stamina. He's drained. You know, they didn't say it were drained, but they were pointing now, oh, he's looking weak. He's gone weak. You just can't get rid of him. You know, he didn't have that pop being drained down to this catch weight that Levine made him fight at. But yeah, what a legendary fighter.
Yeah, and this was at a time when to be legendary, you had to be more than just legend. Like today, people would start calling you legendary long before they would then. Like then, to be a top-notch character, you had to have like a whole series of quality wins. You couldn't just base it off one win. it's like that studying Sam Langford. He beaten one of the greatest stylists, probably the greatest stylist of the lower weights, Joe Gans, the great Joe Gans, over 15 rounds. But they were still like, they still had questions about him. And, a couple weeks later, Jack Blackburn got the best of him in a prearranged draw. But so there were definitely questions, but it was like you couldn't just have like a signature win and you're done. You're just getting started. You got your first signature win. And to become somebody, you had to have a whole series of them. Joe Walcott fought a who's who, and at one point he had $1,000 forfeit posted to challenge any heavyweight in the world. This guy was something else. He really was special. So I had to, even Jack Britton, it almost felt like a diss. I struggled with it as we were starting the list, but Joe Walcott was something else, and he stands out as one of the great stylists and fighters and competitors of the early era, the early gloved era, across the entire thing of the early part of the era. And
I'll throw something else in there as well. People have to realize with Barbados Joe, you get any welterweight, middleweight, or light heavyweight champion from 1910, okay, when Walcott was well past his prime, to 1925. Any light heavyweight, middleweight, or welterweight champion, they are going to be nervy and they are going to have a really hard fight with this guy. We've been talking about Britain, Ted Kid Lewis, even say Jack Dempsey. Do people think Walcott would run from Jack Dempsey? He'd run all right into ring with him. He would have no fear of even a Jack Dempsey, a 6'1" heavyweight puncher. Barbados Walcott was he just seemed to have no fear. And, he'd fight anybody. I have no doubts he'd even fight giants at late 1910s like Fulton and them. I don't think he'd fear anybody. I think he'd fight anybody. I think he was just that kind of fighter.
Absolutely. That was very well put, sir. And, I couldn't put him above this. You guys already know why I couldn't put him, but it would take an awful lot for anybody to be ranked above the Barbados Wonder, as talking about welterweight. And he was cut short because he wasn't the same. He was out from part of 04 to 06 after he shot his hand. So he lost work, and still he wasn't quite the same when he came back. But what a great fighter. He was still a great stylist, but physically maybe he wasn't quite the same with the layoff.
But I want to say one last thing on him if I can.
Yes, sir.
In 1910, when Jack Johnson had faced the boymaker Jim Jeffries, you had a line of fighters and dignitaries in that ring for Jim Jeffries. You had Stanley Ketchel, had Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, John O'Sullivan. You had many of them. But in the third row, because they couldn't get in the ring, they went in the ring one by one, but they couldn't all be in the ring at the same time. We're not allowed. But you had the Barbados Demon, Joe Walcott. You had a frail Joe Gans. He was just about dying then. They sent him back on the train to go back to Baltimore, and he passed away 2 weeks later at his mother's house. You had Joe Jeanette and Bob Armstrong and Jack Blackburn. They were all in the second row in support of Jack Johnson. So that just goes to show you, they were all sitting together, and all those guys were feared. They didn't get the opportunities that they should justly, rightly deserve. So just to add on to what you're saying, this is what we're looking at here. And he 5'1", this man could punch like you won't believe. He could fight. And that's why I had him where I had him. But I think he's underrated to a lot of people who don't understand, like BL mentioned about, someone had mentioned Floyd Mayweather and him. They're not in the same conversation. Not even close. Mayweather couldn't punch. He couldn't keep men like that off of him because of his hands. He's not in the conversation at all. As far as Joe Walcott is concerned, BL is correct. From his time to 25, those light heavyweights and heavyweights wouldn't want to fight him. He was avoided even in his time. It just goes to show you that's how good this man was.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, guys. Thank you both. Thanks everyone for listening. And just thank the heavens for that I get to be part of this great conversation. I'm really enjoying this so much. Yeah, Walcott is somebody who stands out even amongst the people who stand out on multiple levels. I mean, he checks so many different boxes, and he checks some boxes that other guys, there's only just a handful of guys who could do it like that. Walcott, Bob Fitzsimmons, Sam Langford, certain guys. Harry Greb, although Harry Greb wasn't so much a finisher at the higher weights, but Walcott was just vicious, and he had a fiery competitive spirit. In the Sam Langford fight, Langford was ahead on points. He'd won most of the rounds so far, but he sort of teased Walcott, who had been teasing him before the fight, according to Langford. And Walcott came on so strong, the ref thought it balanced out. And Langford actually later, even though the crowd thought Langford should have gotten the draw, got the win and got the welterweight title, Langford was actually like, I was glad to get out of there. I was trying to survive, So Walcott was one of those guys. He had levels, and yeah, it's just a privilege to be able to talk about him and studying him and BL finding that series you did, fight to fight, round to round action of Walcott's. I'm still in the lightweight days when he was, he wasn't fighting lightweights, but when he was fighting, when he was a lightweight. But as a welterweight, he 141, 142 is easy for him to make. He may not have even had to cut if he was in top shape, but certain fights he might come in like 147, 146, but that's probably his walk around weight when he's trained up. He was a small guy and he wasn't scared of anybody. He wanted to fight everybody, and so he gets bragging rights, and he also put together a magnificent career amongst all the badass guys who would fight him. Although some would only fight him under conditions with assurances or the tilted playing field. So that's also another reason he boosts over Britain. Walcott suffered through more adversity, competition adversity, because the whole field was tilted against colored fighters at that time. And so, in spite of many of the greatest fighters of all time, especially of that day, but of all time, were colored fighters just in that day for a variety of reasons. And so, Walcott, yeah, he should be remembered fondly, and he's my number 3. So now we're down. Let me find the neutral. I believe we now reached Scrapbook. We've reached your number 2. And this is a tough one, right? This is a tough one. Go for it, sir.
Yes, the man that I have, and I'm not going to mention this part of why I have him where I have him until I discuss the next man. But this man that I have here was such an underrated fighter in terms of his ability to absorb what you had to offer, his ability to create traps and openings, his ability to make you think one thing and defend against something else that he had no idea he was going to do. He was an illusionary. He was such a great fighter. At welterweight, I have number 2, the great Harlem Jitterbug, Sugar Ray Robinson, Walker Smith. Born May 3rd, 1921, Alley, Georgia. Reside in Detroit, Michigan, where he would meet the great Joe Louis. He would carry the bags for Joe Louis because Joe Louis was not allowed to box. He was carrying his violin case. He had to cross the street from a neighbor that his mother knew. That's the reason why he would cross over the Brewster Center. Ray Robinson had lived 1 block away on that street. So he had to meet him on the corner, and he would give violin case to Ray Robinson. Robinson, he would give the gym bag to Ray Robinson while he would carry his violin case. He went one way, Ray Robinson went into the gym, and then he would make an about face with Stacy McKinley, who was his friend, into the gymnasium. They had that routine going for about 3 months before the violin teacher had met his mother on the porch and told him what the situation was. He stood 5'11.5". He weighed lightweight, welterweight, as well as middleweight. Had 202 total bouts, 175 total bouts, wins, 110 knockouts. He has 65 wins by decision, 134 and 132 pounds is where he actually weighed. He fought from 1940, October 4th was his professional debut, to December 10th, 1965. He was managed by George Gainford, trained by Harry Wiley Sr. His corner man was Pee Wee Beal and Soldier Jones. Soldier Jones had a tire fixing shop on 117th Street in Harlem. And he got the call to come in to work with Ray Robinson. Pee Wee Beal used to train Henry Armstrong before Henry Armstrong would meet Harry Wiley Sr. in 1932 for the Los Angeles Olympic Games. Now, Ray Robinson had 20 bouts in 1941. He fought Charlie Burns and Fizzy Zivic, as well as Marty Servo and Maxie Shapiro. He had 14 bouts in 1942. He faced Fizzy Zivic, Jake LaMotta, Sammy Engot, as well as Marty Servo. He had 6 bouts in 1943. Jake LaMotta, Jackie Wilson, and Henry Armstrong. He had 5 bouts in 1944. Izzy Genezzo was the main fighter during that year. He had 9 bouts in 1945. Tommy Bell, George Sugar Costner, LaMotta, and Jose Basora. 16 bouts in 1946. That's amazing. He was ring with Sammy Angot, Izzy Genezzo. December 20th, 1946. He would become the welterweight champion of the world when he would take on Tommy Bell. That was the highlight of his welterweight career. He had 10 bouts in 1947. Bernie Miller was a very good club fighter. He was in the ring with Jimmy Doyle. That was his first title defense. And he would kill Jimmy Doyle with a left hook. He had a premonition he was going to do it. And he spoke to a Catholic priest and a minister. And he said, go on with the damn fight. Because they had money on Ray Robinson. And Ray Robinson, unfortunately, killed Jimmy Doyle because he was sparring in Pumpkin Lakes. And he hit a man with a left hook. And he knocked him out for 7 minutes. So he woke up with sweat and thought that was going to happen. And lo and behold, it happened. He was also in the ring with Bernard Dukerson. Bernard Dukerson had a brother by the name of Maxie Dukerson. These guys were from Louisiana. He was also in the ring with Kid Gavilan that year. The 6 world welterweight fights. 5 world welterweight defenses. My God, this man was something else. He had middleweight fights, and you know his middleweight history. But as a welterweight, Ozzie Bull Harris, Bernard Dukerson, Cecil Hudson, Bobby Dykes, Bernie Miller, Artie Levine, Jackie Wilson, just to name a few. Steve Valois had a brother by the name of Mike Valois, who was a fighter, and Henry Armstrong would defeat Mike Valois. Mike Valois was a featherweight champion. But Ray Robinson, in my opinion, was an outstanding welterweight champion. He was undefeated as a welterweight champion. He was retired. He would relinquish his title. But I don't have him above another fighter, and I'll explain that why when I talk about it. But a great fighter was Sugar Ray Robinson.
Oh, thank you for that, Scrap. BL, we've now arrived. Drum roll.
Well,
number 2, welterweight.
I'll just say deja vu. My number 2 is number 2 because of some things I'll point out when I talk about number 1. Exactly the same thing. I don't know if it's great minds thinking alike, but exactly the same thing Scrapbook is alluding to. I had exactly the same thought when I considered these 2 fighters who were my top 2. And just like Scrapbook, I have to put Walker Smith, Sugar Ray Robinson, number 2. Now, many people say, well, he's the greatest welterweight of all time. I dispute that. I rate him the greatest middleweight of all time, even over Harry Greb, which hurts me, but he has to get his credit. He goes number 1, 5-time middleweight champion. But at welterweight, even though he was unbeaten at welterweight, and even though he was unbeaten in welterweight title fights, like Scrapbook mentioned, he had a shorter title run there. He looked almost imperious at times. He had other tough fights there. You know, one of Gavilan fights were tough. One of early Zivic fights were really tough. Zivic really taught him meaning of Christmas. After the tough fight with Zivic that some people thought Zivic deserved to maybe win, Robinson said about fighting Zivic, I learned more in that one fight than I've learned in the whole career so far, because Zivic, he always knew where referee was when he threw his elbows when he were in close. He seemed to have a bit like Wilfred Benitez was called El Radar for timing opponents' punches and knowing where punches were coming from. Fritz Zivic was like El Radar of fouling techniques. He seemed to know where referee was so he could foul you on inside and get away with it. And at one point, he kind of blocked a shot of Ray Robinson, then elbowed him right in the nose. You know, because Zivic was rough and tough and a great fighter himself. But Sugar Ray Robinson, to me, his middleweight title record is way more impressive, even, like I said, being unbeaten at welterweight. You know, the fight is a beat at welterweight. You know, Scrapbook's alluded to many, so I don't need to go into too much detail. But he beat Kid Gavilan twice. He went on to become the next great welterweight champion of the early next decade. And like Scrapbook mentioned, he beat excellent fighters like Bernard Dukeson, Steve Belois. He had 10 defeats in over 100 fights. He had over 50 knockouts. Ray Robinson knocked him out, and he was on a win run. And when you look at other fighters he fought, Basora, George Sugar Costner, okay, that famous story where George Costner were winding Ray Robinson up in build-up, and they met him middle of ring, and Robinson said, when they touched gloves, he said, "Your name ain't Sugar, mine is." And then he knocked him out in one round. If I remember, that fight was in 1950 with its Scrapbook. But again, Costner, he just had 10 defeats in over 80 fights. These are no easy pushovers. You know, he also beat another underrated, outstanding fighter called Georgie Abrams. Okay, Georgie Abrams was an outstanding fighter. He also beat the tough and had, you know, hard to beat on his day, California, Jackie Wilson, you know, former Army, really tough fighter. So, you know, when you've had in there Bobby Dykes and all these other fighters, Ray Robinson is a great fighter, and he's my number 3 fighter of all time. But at welterweight, I'm sorry, he has to go number 2, despite, in terms, a bit like Ray Leonard. I mentioned earlier on Ray Leonard on number 9 that Leonard has the mixture of durability, okay, endurance, stamina, speed, power as a welterweight. To me, Ray Leonard was the most complete welterweight fighting in terms of power to speed to foot movement since Sugar Ray Robinson. To me, Ray Leonard was very much in the Sugar Ray Robinson mold. You know, he could fight, he could box, he could move, he could punch, he could fight you on inside, you know, really durable, could fight 15 rounds at a heartbeat. You know, two fighters very similar in many ways, both incredibly tough. But Robinson has to go number 2 simply because, to me, the number 1 deserves to be the greatest welterweight of all time. But I'll talk about my number 1, of course, right after Scrapbook.
Can I add one more thing to what BL had mentioned? With George Sugar Costner, that was a great story, BL. But later that evening, after what happened with him in the middle of that ring, later that evening, he went over at a bar. They had a little affair going, and they had some drinks and everything. It was a little cafe. So Ray Robinson was sitting down with his wife in the May, and George Sugar Costner walked over to the table, and he didn't ask Ray Robinson. He went over to his wife and asked, "Would you like to dance?" So Ray's wife whispered to him and said, "He's asking me to dance." Can you believe that? And Ray said, "Show him how to dance as I showed him how to fight." And I thought that was hysterical. But George Sugar Costner, I met him. He's something else. He was a playful kind of a guy, but he was all right. But that was a touching moment that I learned when I found out what happened with that, and after meeting him as well. But yeah, that was something else, man. So that was a great story, BL.
Yeah, another story I'd like to point out to listeners as well is Scrapbook's alluded that one of Ray Robinson's idols was actually, one of them was Henry Armstrong, another was Joe Louis. Interestingly, that one of Robinson's kind of people who looked up to in boxing world was Henry Armstrong. Interesting symmetry there. But, you know, Ray Robinson also had a massive respect for Jack Blackburn. And at one point, Ray Robinson used to invent stories because Jack Blackburn loved to go fishing. When he wasn't carrying a knife and he wasn't being crazy, he used to love going fishing. And Ray Robinson used to invent reasons to go fishing with Jack Blackburn in the hopes that he could learn from him, because he gave Blackburn a lot of credit being the trainer of one of his idols in the sport when he turned pro, Joe Louis. So yeah, these are all fascinating little stories. Like Scrap mentioned, all these other things fill out the symmetry. Ray Robinson is a great fighter, no doubt. Yeah, it's interesting. All time, I actually rate him one higher than my number 1, but at welterweight, he can only be number 2. But yeah, great story, Scrap, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And I must apologize to you guys in the chat. I guess I somehow managed not to load the graphic I have for Ray Robinson. Fortunately, I had this one kicking around. Never hurts to have a little montage of or collage of Ray Robinson sitting around, so sort of saved the day. But yeah, I made a really nice one for him, a special one, because I knew he'd come in inside the top 2. It's hard, you know. So we're at my number 2. I had the same thing, the great Sugar Ray Robinson, Walker Smith Jr. You know, he was just brilliant at welterweight. And his total career, and I'm sure you guys agree, you know, welterweight and middleweight combined, like a souped up version of like an Emil Griffith career where it's great across 2 weights, but he was really intense with it, and his win-loss is staggering. And yeah, I couldn't put him any even over Walcott. He did enough. He was dominant enough, and he was brilliant enough and influential enough, but also like winning the fights, keeping the schedule in and around welterweight enough to go even over the great Barbados Wonder. So, yep, I won't add too much to what you guys said. You put it beautifully, and I think now, if I may be allowed, we've talked about. Oh, hold on a second. Who's that in the chat? Is that Haplo? Oh, you didn't hear the first half. Oh, here we go. So you're about to find out.
Random, could I do a little shameless plug for 10
Please
seconds?
plug.
Haplo. Do you know Haplo? My friend Haplo has been a friend of mine on here for a lot of years. And I mentioned to him about 5.5 years ago, Haplo, I am going to create a website. Haplo, it's live, boxinglibrarian.com. It's unfinished, but it's live and it's going to be built on the base I've published. I've finally done it, buddy. I've got it. Anyway, sorry, there ends my third shameless plug. I do apologize, guys.
You can plug away. You can talk. You can take. Well, actually, I'm running out of time. So, but you can always you can always bring up the website. What a fantastic thing! I took a peek myself. So we've discussed an awful lot of great fighters who've been in and around the welterweight division between our three lists, but we all agree on number one. And Scrapbook, it is on you, good sir, to take the lead.
So since you're running out of time, what we'll do is I'm just going to do a quick rant, and then we can all collab on this one guy. I'm sure we all have the same guy. I'm just going to do a quick rant, and then let's all chime in with him. My number one, and I'm sure I'm in good company, his name is Henry Jackson, Henry Armstrong, Mel Jackson, Homicide Hank, Hurricane Hank, Hammering Hank. Born December 12, 1912 in Columbus, Mississippi. He died October 24, 1988 in Los Angeles, California. Had the pleasure of meeting him on 2 occasions. He stood 5'5". He had a 67-inch reach, weighed 181 total. Well, he had 181 total fights, had 101 knockouts, 52 decision wins, 152 total wins. That's amazing. He had 21 losses, 4 from 1931 to 1944. He was a featherweight. Man, he had 107 bouts as a featherweight. October 29th, 1937. A welterweight bouts, he had 73. May 31st, 1938. Lightweights, he had 3. August 17th, 1938 was when he would become champion at those weight divisions. Defeated Petey Cerrone in New York's Madison Square Garden at 75 wins, 12 losses, 94 bouts. 6 rounds, he knocked out Petey Cerrone, New York's Madison Square Garden, for the vacant NBA title, as well as the New York sack that Petey Cerrone had. October 29th, 1937 is when he won that title from Petey Cerrone. He defeated Barney Ross in the New York's Madison Square Garden Bowl, 90 wins, 12 losses, 109 total bouts. He had 15 unanimous decision was the distance that it went. And what was happening, Eddie Meade also had Barney Ross. He also had Chalky Wright as well. But Barney Ross was the champion at that time. And Severino Garcia was promised the next opportunity. But Barney Ross had lost. And he told him, if you stop the damn fight, I'll never speak to you again. It's for the New York Sack and the NBA Welterweight Championship belt on May 31st, 1938. He lost that title to Fizzy Zivic October 4th, 1940. That was a professional debut of the man we just talked about, Sugar Ray Robinson. Now, I just want to just mention one thing, and I want everybody to chime in with me. With Henry Armstrong in 1937, he had 27 fights, no losses, with 26 knockouts. He picked up the featherweight championship strap along the way. He was also in the ring with a Philadelphia fighter. And this Philadelphia fighter was an outstanding fighter. He lost his title to Kid Chalk. Now, here's the thing. Henry Armstrong had a record of 27-0 with 26 knockouts. With Edwin Valera, before he passed away, he retired with a record of 27-0 with 27 knockouts. But it took him 8 years to accomplish that feat. Henry Armstrong did that in one single month in 1937 alone. It just goes to show you the caliber of fighter he was. In 1939, this man, and I know BL, I know about the Jimmy Garrison fight situation, but he had five defenses in 1 month in October. It's on record. So when you look at a fighter like Henry Armstrong, and why I know BL is going to mention what he's going to mention about the 19 title defenses, this is why you look at fighters and the time in which they came, you look at the accomplishments, you look at the men that they were around, you look at the whole situation, the mob ties and what have you. And that's why I have Henry Armstrong ranked number 1. BL, let the audience know why you have him ranked number 1 and then random as well.
Yes, Scrapbook, thank you. Great breakdown. Henry Armstrong. Now, I've always thought Ray Robinson was the better fighter of the two in terms of abilities. In a fantasy fight, the best at welterweight, I would pick Ray Robinson to win a tough fight. But in terms of being a great welterweight, that has to go to Henry Armstrong. A, for the fact, okay, he has one of the highest numbers of wins in welterweight title history, okay, I believe at 21. He had, okay, 23 world welterweight title fights, one of the highest totals in boxing history. He also left the division record of 19 welterweight title defenses. He also has one of the highest numbers, I'm not sure if he has the highest number actually, of welterweight title fight knockouts in boxing history. I think he does have the highest total of welterweight knockouts in welterweight title history. When you add all that together, you've also, I just quickly want to mention something else. His first welterweight fight was against Barney Ross. He was 74-3-3, a three-weight champion. He went on a 21 fight unbeaten run. Then he beat Luambers, Seferino Garcia, his first defense, okay, after he jumped down to beat Luambers. So he beats Barney Ross, who was 74-3-3, and in his first welterweight title defense, he beat Seferino Garcia, again, on a win run, okay, greatest Filipino puncher ever in terms of knockouts, okay, and a frightening puncher at time. Used to love fighting at the Olympic Stadium, if I recall. I used to read all his fight reports from there. Loved it fighting there, apparently. 2 defenses later, he beats Baby Arizmendi, who's also on a win run, and another Hall of Fame fighter. He also beats Lou Feldman. Guess what? Lou Feldman, okay, is not on a win run, the first one. He then beats David A., okay, a very good fighter, rated second in world at the time. He was on a 15-fight win run. He then beat the excellent UK fighter Andrew Roderick, top 5 at welterweight, on a 23-fight win run. Okay, he then also beats scores 2 other wins, one against Puerto Rican Hall of Famer Pedro Montanez. He had 6 defeats in over 100 fights on a win run. He then, okay, draws with Seferino Garcia at middleweight before twice beating Paul Jr. Paul Jr., the first fight, he's on a win run again, okay? Paul Jr., Canadian fighter, very, very good fighter, lightweight and welterweight. He also stops and knocks out Ralph Zanelli, another tough contender. He then scores another win on another fighter, Lou Jenkins, the lightweight puncher, who is on a 13-fight win run and is the #1 rated lightweight in the world that year. He coins that out by fighting and losing to Fritsizevich, then failing to re-win welterweight title a second time. Fighting Fritsizevich the first time was on a win run. That year, Fritsizevich would be the #1 welterweight in the world. And even in years after that, you know, fighting Sugar Ray Robinson, everybody tells me, oh, well, Henry Armstrong was completely past it when he fought Sugar Ray Robinson. Well, did you know, okay, that after losing to Willie Joyce in 1943, okay, he knocked out Tippy Larkin in 2 rounds. 2 fights later, he lost to Bojack. Then he went on a win run until he lost to Robinson, beating Saverio Torriello, beating Maxi Shapiro, beating Sammy Angot, beating Willie Joyce, okay, before then beating Jimmy Garrison latest time and Joey Silva before losing to Sugar Ray Robinson. And even after that, he scored knockouts then against Aldo Spaldi and Saverio Torriello straight after that. But when you look at his resume, the fighters he fought, they say he's got a weak resume. I'm sorry. Ross and Seferino Garcia and Arizmendi and David A. and Roderick and Pedro Montanez and Zivic and Lou Jenkins, all these guys are not weak opponents. He set historical records at welterweight. He has, to me, the far greater welterweight title record at welterweight than Ray Robinson, without a shadow of a doubt. His overall welterweight resume at title level is better than Sugar Ray Robinson's. Yes, Robinson beat, Kid Gavilan at title level, but that does not surpass Barney Ross, Seferino Garcia, Baby Arizmendi, Pedro Montanez, Lou Jenkins, all these other fighters. For those reasons, Henry Armstrong to me is the #1 greatest welterweight of all time. Even though, like I say, I think Ray Robinson in physical abilities and fighting skills was the superior fighter slightly, I still rate Henry Armstrong #1.
Right, there's a difference, and Randall, I'm going to jump off, but I just want to say there's a difference so people understand. We're not saying that Henry Armstrong was a greater fighter as welterweight of Ray Robinson. We're saying his accomplishment. 19 title defenses. Ray Robinson didn't have 19 title defenses. And there was things that happened because of the war and everything else. He couldn't have those certain fights. But still, you have to put what the ink says on paper. So for that reason, 19 title defenses and the men that he was in the ring with, that's at welterweight. But you got to also consider Luther Slugger White, Aaron Curry, Aldous Spaulding, Tippy Larkin, Ron Jarita, Baby Arizmendi, Willie Joyce, Rousey, Earl Turner, Davey Day. I mean, the men he was in the ring with and what he has done during the time in which he came, you have to give the man credit. Henry Armstrong. And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic tribute, gentlemen. I wholeheartedly agree. For a lot of the same, for the same reasons, basically. Robinson was a phenomenal welterweight, seemed practically untouchable at welterweight. But Hammer and Hank did more at welterweight, and his run was just ferocious. And so, even though when Robinson, I struggled a little bit because when Robinson was in the weight below, he was already fighting welterweights. And when he was at welterweight, he was already fighting middleweights. He became ranked at middleweight while he was still at welterweight. So I struggled a bit, but ultimately Armstrong did so much, and the level of opposition was so high, and the win-loss ratio was so epic. Got to hand it to him. What a fantastic fighter. All the fighters on our list, just great competitors.
Brandon, I know Scrapbook has to go and you have to go. Can I just mention one of the really good point on Henry Armstrong to close out?
Please.
In 1936, he lost to a fighter on DQ called Tony Chavez. Okay, that was in 1936. Then from 1936 all the way down, until 1939, till he lost the lightweight rematch with Lou Ambers, a period of 2.5 years, Henry Armstrong in only, I want to put Floyd's 49-0 in context. Henry Armstrong in 2.5 years, went 46-0 with 39 knockouts in just 2.5 years. And in that 2.5 years, he had 11 wins against champions and Hall of Famers, multiple wins against top 10 fighters. He won all 3 of his world titles at featherweight, welterweight, then lightweight. He also made the first 7 defenses of his welterweight title in that 46-0, 39 KO run. And he beat Rodolfo Casanova. He avenged the Tony Chavez loss. He beat Mikey Belois. He beat Frankie Click. He beat fighters like Lou Massey, Benny Bass. He beat Peter Cerrone, Bobby Beauchild, who were quite a tough fighter in his own way. He beat Chalky Wright, Everett Wright-Meyer, Baby Arizmendi, Lou Feldman, Barney Ross, Lou Ambers, Seferino Garcia, Baby Arizmendi. That is one of the most incredible fight runs in boxing history. Hardly ever gets mentioned. 2.5 years, 46-0, 39 KOs. All those great wins, all those title fights. And his title fights, actually, last point, I promise, from when he beat Barney Ross, in 1938, he had all 23 of those welterweight title fights up until the Sakenzovich loss in 1941. In a period of around 3 years, he had 23 world welterweight title fights. I don't need to say anymore, I don't think, on Henry Armstrong. I think our work is done.
I believe so. I think we've said enough. This was just so enriching. Thank you both, gentlemen, for joining me for this, and I look forward to the light heavyweights. I'll be starting my list in my head at work tonight. And this was quite a battle. This was tougher. We did, for the uninitiated, we already did a top 10 middleweights countdown. We did a top 10 heavyweights of 1900 to 1925. and so I guess 26 years. But we did and then we did, what was it? The top 5 toughest seasons of the great Harry Greb, the Pittsburgh
Yes.
Windmill, and then the initial one that got it started was, other than BL allowing me on a couple of his live chats, but also came on the channel to count down the top. What did we do? The 5 or 10? I can't even remember. Top 5 toughest seasons.
Years of Sam Langford, and I think we both agreed, didn't we, that we'd have loved to have had Scrapbook on that one as well.
Maybe we could revisit it. Maybe we could do the top 10 seasons and revisit it.
An overshadowing. But yeah, I'm looking forward to light heavyweights if we're doing that one. That is tough, and it's always caused me biggest headache. But I'll look forward to that for sure.
Oh, there's some great fighters to consider. Jack O'Brien and Dylan and Levinsky. Levinsky, I got to watch his career video again. His resume is just silly.
And Darius Michael Zuski, don't forget. I'm only joking.
Well, this has been fantastic.
3 different cities in one day. Incredible.
Yeah. Stuff like that is not accomplished anymore now. But I would like to thank the listeners and those on the Playback Gang, and I would love to, again, pass my thanks to Scrapbook Boxing and Random Acoustic Thoughts. I'll stress to the listeners, I am so blessed to be in this position, having these regular live chats we do. The conversations are so deep and insightful. I'm just blessed at the moment on YouTube. You know, I've got a happy channel. I'm uploading again videos. I've got my website published now. I'll build that. But chance to partake in live streams like this for me is my YouTube cream cake. It really is. It's my chocolate gâteau with extra cream on top.
Yeah, I love this so much, and I'm really looking forward to light heavyweights. Yeah, thank you, Scrapbook. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your excellent channel. That's some great content. I was seeing the book you're putting together, the video you just put up. Those are some great photos in there. Oh my goodness, some of those pictures of Wills you had.
4 months, I'll have a book ready. Hopefully about 3, maybe 4 months. I'll let you guys know.
Wow.
That would be amazing.
That's amazing, Scrap.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Wow. I'm amazed. You publish that book, I'm buying. Trust me, I'm buying.
Yeah, I'm buying too.
That's an honor. Appreciate it.
Well, it's been a real pleasure, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm off to work. This has been just great. I'm really fired up for the light heavyweight one. That's going to be a tough one too. There are a lot of people to mention in the division that sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's been less throughout history. The broad arc of history has been less of a focal point, but what a great conversation that's going to be. I look forward to that.
Can I just have the last sentence to
Please,
Scrapbook?
sir.
Scrapbook, you know, I think the world of you. And like I've said before, buddy, jokingly, you know, if you need someone to personally guard your archive, I can order in. Okay, I can order pizza in. I can go to a local store and get plenty of food, and no one will get near it. And I will live in there for a few months and look after it and polish it and dust it and keep it all tidy for you. And then when I leave with an enormous headache and can't remember everything I've read, I'll just say thank you very much. But you know, but yeah, just in case you do ever need anyone to guard it, I'm joking. But, yeah. You know, thank you for everything you do, and thank you guys. I'm gonna have to get off now, but what a pleasure it is, as always.
Thank you, guys.
Yep. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and have a great day.
You got it.